What is going on, everyone? My name is Scorpion and welcome to the official Battle Hub Draft League Season 3 Power Rankings. In today's video we will be taking a look at all the teams that the coaches have put together in Season 3, and we will be objectively trying to rank them based on two things. One, how good we think the team works as a whole, and two, what their chances are at making playoffs / winning the season. We do not take player skill into account with this, so if we have a really good player with a not so solid team, that does not mean anything personal, and obviously the other way around as well. So basically just try to, don't take anything we say personal. If we don't think your team is very good, you are also free to adjust it using the transactions you have during the season. But for now, we really wanted to take a look at what the teams look like for week 1 and what their chances are at taking the prize of the Pokemon Scarleton. We have 5 tiers here. We have S, A, B, C, D, some funny little tags at them as well. And we're gonna get started in the same way that we did last season. Before I begin though, I have two very lovely people here with me try to help me with these rankings, and our first my first guest here today is everyone's favorite BHDL analyst, also known as the Captain.
Hey everybody, Captain B-Nard here, and you took the words right out of my mouth. I am BHDL's #1 analyst, and I am here, yes that is a word, I just created it, and I am here to give the most unbiased, objective, subjective opinion possible.
And on the other hand, we have another lovely commissioner on the BHDL team. It is also someone who is going to help us here with the power ranking. It's your boy, Brandon.
What's up, guys? It's me, Brandon. I'm here. Captain B-Nard actually took the words out of my mouth because I'm also here just to give the most objective opinion possible as well.
The most objective, subjective opinion.
Gotta love it, gotta love it. All right, without further ado.
We love it.
We are doing this in the same way that we did Season 2, which is we're going to be going through the draft order, and we're going to do coach number 1, then coach number 16, then 2, then 15, and so on and so forth. So starting off, our first team in the draft is going to be Virudu, also known as Birudu, from the Discord server. Go ahead and join the Discord server, guys. It really is the best place to go for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet Wi-Fi battles right now. There is a link in the description down below. There won't be, because I haven't gotten the permission to get clickable links on this channel yet, but please go ahead and join the Discord server. All right, memes aside. Anyone wants to open with this team?
Yeah, I will take the lead on this one.
Go ahead.
So, you also once again took the words out of my mouth with the intro. So,
you're welcome.
You already did it, so it's all good. So, we're talking about the individual who was position number 1 in the draft, Birudu, obviously the most favorable position to be in the draft, so you would expect him to put together quite the impressive team, and he has done just that. So, looking at his team, it is pretty obviously a sand team, as you can see. He's got the #1 draft pick, the heavy-hitting Excadrill, which is just an absolute menace without sand. Add the sand in the background, and it is just an absolute force to be reckoned with. Of course, he backed that up with Tyranitar, just obviously a really tanky Pokemon, really solid Pokemon. And then he's got, of course, the Houndstone as a Terra Captain to kind of complete the sand core on the team. So he's also got other stuff that I would consider to be big threats, joke intended, such as the Walking Wake, just an all-around powerhouse of a Pokemon, the Tornadus Therian, great utility and pivoting in that. He's also got stuff like the A-Zelf, which hits very hard as well. And then also Moltres, Vileplume, Rotom Frost, and Carbink. So, my initial thoughts on this team, I would say I like this team a lot, to be honest with you guys. So, the biggest thing that I like about this team is the synergy. So, obviously, with this being a pseudo-sand team, he's got a lot of synergy with the Excadrill, the Tyranitar, and the Houndstone. I absolutely love the Terra Captain placement, specifically with the Houndstone, because Houndstone is going to be a big player, I think, for him this season. With the ability to Terra, it's really going to wreak havoc on opponents' teams. That combined with the Excadrill in the sand is just going to make for a really, really deadly combination, I think. But also, I like the Moltres as a Terra Captain, too. I think, obviously, Moltres has some pretty exploitable weaknesses, so it could definitely benefit from Terra. The Carbink as a Terra Captain is kind of whatever, in my opinion. Carbink generally speaking, although, I know I'm going to get a bunch of crap from a bunch of people for this, but I don't care. This is my opinion. I'm not a big fan of Carbink.
That's fine.
I know it's very tanky. It's very bulky. But I don't like Pokemon as passive as Carbink, because I think that it's just set up fodder personally. But yeah, that was just kind of like a why not Terra Captain, because he had the points, so there's no reason not to make it a Terra Captain.
Of course.
So on the flip side of that, I'm also going to say I think the couple of negatives that I have about this team are there is a kind of sort of unchecked water weakness on this team, which is kind of to be expected for a sand team. So he's got a lot of Pokemon weak to water, doesn't have too many Pokemon that resist water. So I would expect maybe the Houndstone or the Moltres, if they come to be Terra Water or something that resists water, possibly, because he's definitely there's definitely a glaring water weakness there. But other than that, I also think the team is a tad predictable, because obviously it's a sand team, it's a sand core, so I would expect him to bring that just about, if not every week. But all in all, just a really, really solid team. Your thoughts, Scorpion?
Yeah, so I think you made excellent points. A lot of those I definitely agree with. There is a very powerful sand core on this team. What I do really like about this team, and obviously me and Biradu kind of drafted together, basically, and obviously in his draft analysis he talked about it as well. The Walking Wake is an excellent addition to this team in my opinion, just because of how it punishes other people replacing the weather, because with the exception of snow, if someone tries to replace his sand with rain or sun especially, Walking Wake can become a massive threat in that. I am also a big fan of Tornadus Therium, because even though it is a bit predictable, one thing that I have noticed is that flying is a very, very potent offensive typing in draft. It's not a super easy type to guard yourself against, and with that powerful hurricanes or bleak wind storms, this Pokemon is just very good both offensively and defensively. Like you mentioned, I also think the Terra Captains are excellently placed, and just like Tornadus, Houndstone also obviously attacks you with that Poltergeist, potentially even Terra Ghost, which hits like a truck. It's very fast. And what I like about Biradu's team as well is it may be a sand core, but it's not completely, and this is something that I do think of the team, it's not required for him to bring sand every week, I think. I do think that there are plenty of Pokemon that can function outside of sand too. And like you mentioned, I'm not a massive fan of Carbink, and I will say that the thing with this team is that Carbink is a bit of a double-edged sword, because it does have good defensive stats. It is a rock type, which means it gets a special defense boost in sand, which is a little bit of extra synergy. However, Carbink is also very, very passive, and it only really hits hard with Body Press, because that's kind of a move that it does get with its amazing base 150 defense. But other than that, it doesn't really do much. What I also think is a bit of an unfortunate weakness with this team is the Terra Captains are great, especially Houndstone and Moltres, but I don't see these Pokemon ever going to a battle at the same time, because I think they both benefit too much from Terra, to the point where like you should bring one of them, because if you bring both of them, you can't Terra one of them, guaranteed. And I do think that these Pokemon are going to struggle to function without Terra, especially I used Moltres in Season 1, and not making it a Terra Captain for me was a mistake. So if he brings the Houndstone, I think objectively speaking, he can't really bring the Moltres. But yeah, those are my thoughts. And obviously, yeah, there's also a big water weakness, which you mentioned already. But yeah, I do think this is a very solid team. I really like the speed tiers. The speed tiers are very hard to abuse, and he's also got a lot of hazards. But yeah, that's my thoughts on the team. Brandon, food for thought?
So I'm just going to start off by saying that, unlike y'all's opinion, I actually like the Carbink. I feel like Carbink in some situations, even if it might not be out here killing stuff necessarily, I feel like there's a lot of situations where Carbink could just be outright annoying. And yeah, I just have a different opinion overall on Carbink. One thing I do like about Biradu is Biradu's team is the speed tiers, because all three of the Pokemon you have that are like over that base 100, which at one point in time was like, you know, the thing you wanted to be, and now base 100 is like, you know, meh. Mm-hmm. And the three Pokemon he has that are above that, they're all, I like that they're all hard hitters, and there's ways to use Azelf to where it can just disrupt teams. And then, you know, his Tornadus with the Regenerator. I can see that thing being annoying and stuff because you could set Rain, for example, to try to counter his team, but if he has like high walking weight or Hurricane on his Tornadus, he can just, you know, punish you for even thinking about bringing it.
Definitely. The
only thing I don't personally like about the team, and it's just a personal nick, it's Excadrill is his only form of hazard removal, which, don't get me wrong, I mean, it's nice to have because, I mean, you know, you let him get his little speed boost, he can be a threat. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I just personally don't like one of your powerhouses being your only form of hazard removal, because if you can predict it, it just makes it easier to take him out. And Excadrill in Sand, as we all know, can be a menace.
Absolutely.
So I feel like he shouldn't put that burden on Excadrill. But that's just my personal thought on that. But overall, I think he has a pretty solid team.
Yep. It is quickly worth mentioning that this document is also mainly used for, like this type of document is used for national dex formats. So in the top, on the bottom right corner of the screen, you can see that it points out that Moltres and Rotom Frost get the move Defog, but they do not. So what Brandon said is correct. Excadrill is indeed Beardoo's only form of hazard removal. Now, in his defense, one of his thought process behind this was the fact that because Excadrill's move pool already isn't the deepest, running Rapid Spin is not like unheard of. It definitely is something you can fit in his moveset. But you are absolutely right in saying that if any turn that he spends removing hazards with Excadrill is a turn that he's not using sweeping, and that could definitely cost him. But
yeah, I feel like that's a little bit of a nitpick personally, but I do agree with you guys generally speaking. Like, yeah, you don't want to put your hazard removal on like your sweeper. Generally, I agree with that, but I also do think that's a little bit of a nitpick. But we are here to pick the nits, so
yep, fair absolutely. Enough. So it's ranking wise, what do you guys think? I'm personally more leaning towards the A tier, but I'm curious to hear what you guys think.
I agree with it being in the A tier because this team is definitely a threat, or in our case, a threat.
A big threat. Yep.
Yeah, I would agree with you guys. I think it does belong in the A tier as well. I'm borderline between A and S, but I'm leaning to agree with you guys because, you know, and the main reasons for me, probably the biggest reason is just the really glaring water weakness that can be abused. But also, like I said, the predictability. And don't get me wrong, like there's a lot of variety on this team. There's a lot of strength on this team, I think. Like, we haven't even talked about the stuff like the Vileplume or the Rotom Frosts. Well, even though they're not like mere Pokemon, they are still good Pokemon in their own right. So, but I think all things considered, of course, yeah. So I think all things considered, I think A tier seems appropriate.
Yep. Obviously, I do think that the water weakness is plenty enough to get it out of S tier, because water is just a very, like, if your team is weak to steel, for example, or maybe bug, then like those are not exactly super potent offensive type, but water is super potent. And I also do think that while I do think that when you draft a sand team in a draft league, this is about as good as it gets. I do think Beard did a fantastic job about drafting sand, but sand is still sand, and it's a more of a gimmick playstyle than anything. So I think that's what keeps it out of S tier. But A tier it is. And with that,
fair enough,
we are going to move on to our favorite coach of the piercing Pawniards with the handmade logo. The best? Not really. Brandon, you were the one that talked last in the previous one, so do you want to take the lead in this one?
Gotcha, I can do that. So when I initially looked at his the bestest team, something I'd like noticed right off gate is that he has a nice speed tier to his team, and everything that's fast can also be a threat, because like the Roaring Moon, for example, Roaring Moon, the fact that thing gets knocked off now with a base 119 speed, he can just come in, bandit for nothing, and it's going to just do a lot of damage to whatever. He has Jolteon. Now, one thing I will say about Jolteon, I think it's a nice Terra Captain. Kinda can be underwhelming though, if you don't, because it kind of does need setup, or at least to have setup or have Life Orb, which You know, you don't really want to chip your own Terra Captain, but overall, I do think he has some good Terra Captains. In Jolteon, in Poliwrath, because that thing he just comes out with his dukes up, literally just squared up every time. Personally, something I kind of didn't like is he only has one form of hazard removal, but at the same time, you know, you just need a turn to do it. I think his team is also nice on the bulk side as well, because he has Landorus T, who can just come in on just about any physical attacker and just, you know, bring them down. Yeah. Then you have Tinkaton, who has, in my opinion, one of the best typings in the whole game. Zoroark, actually, to me, also, even though he's frail, to me, that typing, you know, you can play around with it. He's hard to hit. And then Amoonguss Amoonguss does Amoonguss things. That thing is just, you know, and he doesn't, like, have a particularly, I think he's good on the bulk. One thing I do dislike about the overall defensive typings of this team, though, I do see that he has a dragon weakness, kinda. Yep. And his team doesn't really. It also has a fairy weakness. Like, he only has really one. He only has, unless I'm tripping, he only has 2 switch-ins to fairy. And dragon and fairy are so. Just about everybody's going to have at least a dragon type and a fairy type. And to me, those are like 2 of the strongest typings in the game. So to have a team that's weak to those, I don't really like that, but at least 2 of his Pokemon that fall into the weaknesses of that, they're Terra Captains, so he can't just Terra to get out of that. But considering what he was able to do last season with Zoroark, I feel like with this particular team, he's just going to go. I see him having another great season. I personally think the team is good overall. But at the same time, I don't really like the fairy and dragon weaknesses, just because of how prominent those 2 typings are in the game right now.
Yeah, that's fair.
I agree with what you're saying, and I'll pick up on that note by saying that I think, in addition to having those dragon and fairy weaknesses, I also noticed a pretty glaring ice weakness on this team, too. So there's a lot of weaknesses to those 3, so not the most type-balanced team. On the plus side, I will say that I think he's got a good combination of offensive and defensive Pokemon on this team, so it's really well balanced in that respect, which I really appreciate. The Terra Captains, I'm kind of 50-50 on, to be honest with you guys, so I really like the Jolteon as a Terra Captain. I think that's a great choice, because as we all know, Jolteon has kind of a limited move pool. But to be honest with you guys, I think he would have been better served making something like the Tinkaton his other Terra Captain, rather than going for quantity over quality with the Altaria and the Poliwrath. That's what that kind of feels like to me. Additionally, I will say one other kind of sort of problem I have with this, and actually 2 little things. The one being the only one form of hazard removal is, a little bit of a nitpick. But the fact that one form of hazard removal is the Altaria, right? I don't think anything else can hazard remove on this team.
Nope, you're correct.
In addition to that, I think that this roster is a bit shallow, to be completely honest with you guys, because stuff like the Sneasel, okay, like how often are we going to see that come to a game? Even stuff like the Altaria, even though it's a Terra Captain, Altaria is not a great Pokemon. It's kind of an underwhelming Pokemon, in my personal opinion.
There's a reason it's
I do
P,
like
right?
using it. Exactly, I was going to say, I like it in the lower tiers, but it is an underwhelming Pokemon, and I think his attempt to use Terra to fix that is not going to have as positive of an effect as he thinks it is. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think definitely he would have been better served to make that Tinkaton the Terra Captain. But having said all of that, I do think this is a very solid team. Obviously, you have stuff that hits really hard, like the Roaring Moon. Landorus Therian. Therian is also bulky. Necrozma is bulky and hits hard too. Jolteon, very fast and hits hard, obviously. So this is a good team. Obviously, we can't forget about Hisuian Zoroark, obviously fast and hits hard. This is a very solid team in my personal opinion, but I think that there are definitely some issues with it.
Yeah, I think most of the things you guys touched on, I heavily agree with. Especially the first thing that stood out to me is this team's heavy reliance on Tinkaton, indeed, for those Ice, Dragon, and Fairy weaknesses. Outside of Tinkaton, there are no Dragon resistances on this team. Outside of Tinkaton and Amoonguss, there are no Fairy resistances on this team. And even though there are plenty of Ice resistances, like for example, again, the Tinkaton, the Poliwrath, and even the Sneasel, there are also a bunch of Pokemon that are weak to Ice, mainly the Roaring Moon, and the Amoonguss, and the Altaria and the Landorus, which are both 4 times weak to it. Another little issue that I have is because of how solid I think Jolteon is as a Terra Captain, I don't see many games in which you can afford to bring both Jolteon and Altaria, because they are both reliant on Terra. Now, I do think that Altaria has some good things going for it. It is not the best defogger, but it does have usable offenses and decent coverage. Another thing about Altaria that kind of always makes me worried is its access to Cotton Guard. The fact that this Pokemon can boost its defense by 3 stages in 1 turn is definitely terrifying. Like, you really need to keep your special attackers alive when you face this thing. So that's definitely a good point. But yeah, I mean, there's a reason why it's in PU, right? It's still not the best Mon. And I do like Poliwrath a lot as a Pokemon, but no Rain. Where's the Rain? I don't like the fact that he's got Poliwrath as just its standalone Pokemon, because I feel like without Rain support, Poliwrath is very mediocre. Now, I'm shitting on this team. I'm shitting on this team like I think it's terrible. That's absolutely not the case. I do think his speed control is amazing. Let's not let that go unnoticed. He's got 3 Pokemon, including the Sneasel, with a speed tier above 110. He's got a Pokemon at base 110 in the Hisuian Zora arc. He's got a. I do think what I really like about the Best's team is, just like last season, he's got a lot of Pokemon that work well with Hisuian Zora arc. This is kind of his Pokemon at this point. Like, he's the tomfoolery he's pulled off with this Pokemon is always something that makes me laugh. And because of the fact that I'm facing him this season, I'm honestly really excited to see like how it feels like to be on the other end of it. But like, when I look at this team,
not great. I can tell you from experience, not great.
All right,
go on.
I'm looking forward to experiencing it. But like, when I look at this team, right, I see Amoonguss, I see Roaring Moon, I see Necrozma, I see Tinkaton, and I see Landorus. All of these are pretty dangerous Pokemon to disguise your Zora arc as, because they obviously Photon Geyser is a move that hits on the physical side, despite it being a special attack. And most of these other guys are like support Pokemon. And if this Mon just catches you off guard with a Specs Hyper Voice or something, while you think like, oh, maybe I need to switch in a Grass type to absorb a Spore, for example, you're gonna be in for a bad time. And I really like that about the Best's team. Like we mentioned, I do think it's not without its flaws, and the reason why I do heavily agree with what Captain said, which is that this roster is not very deep, is because I think especially the Sneasel and the Poliwrath, again the latter because there's no Rain, are realistically not going to show up to very many games. But the Best can cook. This guy is an amazing team builder, so I don't want to doubt him too much. Let's get into ranking this team, guys. What are we thinking?
Personally, and this is primarily just because of the weaknesses and the one form of hazard removal, I personally would rank it as in the B tier, a solid team.
Okay. Cap?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm definitely leaning on B because, like I said, you got your powerhouses, you got your speed control, that's all great. But then on the flip side, obviously, you have a lot of unchecked weaknesses. You have kind of a shallow roster compared to some of the other ones, so I would say B for sure. All
right, I was more sort of leaning towards lower A, but I, again, given the points we've talked about, I do think B is solid, so we'll go with that. Piercing Pawniards going up there, and we are moving back to the front of the wheel to the Down Under Krookodiles, coached by Roller. So because I've you guys started, yeah, I was going to say I'll take the lead on this one. So first of all, Roller is drafting the Boulder. That was the first thing that kind of stood out to me, which I think is really thematic. But I am a big fan of Iron Boulder. I think this Pokemon is a massive threat, and I respect the hell out of the fact that Roller got that as his first pick. And there are definitely things I like about this team. First of all, this team is not without its threats, and when I say that, I'm mainly referring to Landorus Incarnate, which, for those who do not know the rules of their league, is unrestricted with Sheer Force in this league. So it can have that. So he can choose between both Sand and Sheer Force. He has the Iron Boulder and he has the Raging Bolt. And those three in particular, they scare me. He also has a very solid defensive core, in my opinion, with Hippowdon and Zapdos mostly, but also Registeel, which is a Terra Captain. And even the Probopass, the Weirder to an extent, and the Hisuian Decidueye can all play defensive roles. So there is definitely a good mix of offense and defense. And he also just has, just like Beardo, he also has a Sand team, obviously, with plenty of abusers. There's the Sand Force Probopass, the Sand Force Landorus, and obviously the Iron Boulder, which gets a special defense boost in the sand. However, this team is definitely not without its flaws. First of all, this team is probably the #1 team in the league with the least type variety, and I'm sure you guys have got that written down as well. It's super, super water weak, it's super, super ground weak, and it's also super, super ice weak. These 3 types are all very common, they're all easy to throw out, especially water, and they just click buttons on this team. He does have the Hisuian Decidueye, but if you task this one mon with taking all of these hits, it's gonna be in for a bad time. And the Registeel as well, it definitely can Terra into types to make it more sturdy in that regard. But that's gonna be like, Registeel can only really be super bulky on one side of the spectrum. And if your opponent has like mixed attackers with these types, good luck defending yourself against them. His only form of priority on this team is also Raging Bolt Thunderclap. I'm not a big fan of that fact. And like I mentioned earlier, because of the fact that it's the only Pokemon on the team that resists water and ground, I think Hisuian Decidueye is realistically going to show up to almost every single game. And I don't think Hisuian Decidueye is a bad Pokemon at all, but for its price, the fact that this Pokemon is basically necessary to not get completely run over is a big issue. So this team is all in on sand. It's going to do one thing, and if you can't deal with it too well, good luck. But I don't think too highly of this team, to be completely honest. But what do you guys think?
One other thing that and this might just be a nitpick, but one other thing that I don't really like about the team that you started on, you touched on, but just to add on, Decidueye has to come in and take hits, but Decidueye, from what I understand, is his only form of hazard removal on his team as well. So it's like that thing. So that thing goes down, and your opponent just stacks hazards. Now his team just struggles to come in on because from what I see, he only has 3 Pokemon: Landorus, Zapdos, and Registeel. That if it's spikes or T-spikes, they can they don't have to worry about that. Depending on the situation. But the rest of his team getting chipped and then just getting, I don't think his team just wants to get chipped that much. And then something else is, what's this thing called? Raging Bolt being his only resistance to water, but that's kind of something you would want to keep around too. Just for just in case it's like a late game situation that you need it. So I just feel like some of his Pokemon that could be more threatening are put in bad positions immediately because of what he needs defensively. But
yep, I understand what you're saying completely.
Yeah,
I do agree. The one positive thing I want to say about this team, which I don't know if you guys maybe glossed over it or not, but I think that this team is capable of applying an insane amount of offensive pressure.
Yeah.
That's a big thing. So like the Iron Boulder, the Landorus incarnate with Sand Force, like that thing is going to hit so hard.
I think that's the first thing I mentioned.
The Iron Boulder, is it okay? Maybe I blanked on that, but
no worries.
In that case, I agree with you. But that's really the big pro to this team. He does have some defensive power, some defensive backbone, like the Zapdos as well. He has stuff like the Galvantula with Sticky Web, which is super useful. But I do agree with pretty much all the negatives you guys said. I think this team has a big problem with unchecked weaknesses to water, to ice, to ground. And like you said, those are extremely offensive types that are going to be on everybody's team, so that's going to be difficult.
Yep.
Relying on Hisuian Decidueye to tank hits while also being the only hazard remover is asking a lot of Hisuian Decidueye for what it is,
This mod is like the star of the team, which it really shouldn't be.
Yeah, exactly. So it seems like it feels like if Hisuian Decidueye gets knocked out early, then he's going to be in for a bad time. But additionally, it's also one of his Terra Captains. So like if he Terras it out of that grass fighting typing, then it's not going to be checking any of those weaknesses anyway. You know.
Yep.
So I do think that while this team does have some decent power and some decent bulk to it, there are quite a bit of issues with this team, I think, as well.
Yep.
So.
Let's, without further ado.
Which is why.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, which is why I'm kind of leaning toward throwing it into the team personally. You say Scorpion.
What did you say? What did you want to place it?
Oh, I said C. I don't know if I
C.
cut out.
Okay, yeah. I heavily agree with that because I do think that because of the presence of the Iron Boulder, the Landorus, and the Raging Bolt, which is what we mentioned, these Pokemon are massive threats and you cannot count them out. Especially what I do think I really like is a couple of teams that I've seen with Iron Boulder in draft in the past, is that people draft Iron Boulder with basically no support for it. And Boulder did that basically one-up that by giving it a special defense boost, and Iron Boulder already has quite a decent special defense stat, so it can take special hits very well. So I definitely do think, like we mentioned, this team is not without its powerhouses. There definitely is some potential, and so for that reason I refuse to put it in the D tier, but I do also agree with C. What do you think, Brandon?
I also agree with C, but it's only because of the unchecked weaknesses. If he had more options, I would consider it for B, just because of like the power he has. Because I'm not gonna, because I can't overlook how strong Iron Boulder is, Sheer Force Lando, how strong Raging Bolt is. But just because of the weaknesses, the unchecked weaknesses, I had to put it in C as well.
Yep. And with that being said, I think me and the captain are going to take the lead on this one, because we are going to be taking a look at the Piedmont Triad Kickers, coached by the one and only Brandon.
That is right.
So, Cap, you want to start off with this one?
Yes, I do. So, we got the good old BP, Brandon P. here, also on the call, obviously, as you guys know.
Yep. If you guys want to know more about Brandon's thoughts on his own video, I will leave a link to all the draft analysis that have been uploaded to their respective channels in the description down below. Please go and check them out. Anyway, go ahead.
Fair enough. All right, so this team is pretty nice in my opinion. It's a pretty nice team. You have some pretty solid offensive presence on this team. Obviously with stuff like the Cinderace, the Keldeo, the Haxorus, even the Mousehold, obviously. I definitely see this as more of an offensive team than a defensive team for sure. Obviously the round 1 Comfey pick threw us all for a loop, but you know, he had a plan and he stuck to it. Obviously with the Terra Captain, which feeds into the other big plus that I want to say is I think the Terra Captains on this team are extremely well placed, specifically with the Comfey and the Mousehold. Obviously Comfey with the Triad giving the priority to all the healing moves is pretty strong.
Plus free priority.
Terra Captain, yes, and making it a Terra Captain is really going to make the best possible use out of that Pokemon. Additionally, Mousehold, again, is a Pokemon that I quite like and I think is slept on. Population Bomb is always going to be a threat unless you have a Ghost type, but the fact that that thing can Terra too is certainly something to watch out for. He does have some defense, such as the Wheezing Galar and the Jirachi. Overall, though, I'm not super impressed with the defensive capabilities of this team. That's kind of the one negative that I have to say about this team, is I think it kind of lacks a really solid defensive core. So you've got the Galarian Weezing and the Jirachi, obviously, but outside of that, it doesn't seem like there's a ton that's going to tank hits. So that's why I say I think it's definitely more of an offensive team. Additionally, I would, going back to the positives, I would say I think this is a pretty deep roster, so that's a big positive for me. Obviously, we have the Terra Captain Pikachu at one point there, which Brandon has vowed to us that he is going to use at least once this season, so hopefully he doesn't make a liar out of himself and he goes ahead and uses it. Otherwise, I'm going to have a YouTube expose on him like I
believe.
already had with so many others. But yeah, overall, really solid team, Scorpion.
I absolutely agree. I do really like Brandon's speed control, and also just like in season 2, he has a lot of priority. There's the first impression from the Haxorus, the vacuum wave from the Keldeo. I think it's Aqua Jet as well. Sucker Punch from Cinderace or Quick Attack. Triage Comfy, obviously. So there's a lot of ways that the team could stop sweeps. I do think the type balance is excellent. I had a look at the type chart for this team, and there's very little prominent types that actually hit this team very well. So I definitely am a big fan of that. I also think Brandon's team has quite a few versatile mons, like in the sense that obviously Comfey is a bit predictable, but Cinderace can do like Scarf, Band, Support, Keldeo can be like Calm Mind, Spec, Scarf, Hexers can be Choice Item, Dragon Dance, even defensive to an extent. Mousehold obviously a little bit more predictable. Weezing can be a Specs user. Do not underestimate Specs Weezing. I've used that thing at OU and it works. Especially when your opponent is expecting a physically defensive set or something. Jirachi obviously is about as versatile as it can be. Gorfaya is also about as versatile as it can be. And Toadscruel, not the most versatile one in the world, but it does get it does have a very good special defense stat. Grass Ground is not a terrible offensive typing. I do think Pikachu and Dusclops obviously won't show up to too many games, but I think honestly in this roster that's okay, because the rest of the roster is deep enough. Another thing that I really like about Brandon's team, which is by far the strongest in the league in my opinion, is this team says a big FU to your hazards. It has Core Chain Cinderace, Tidy Up Mousehold, and Rapid Spin and Toadscruel and Defog Weezing. So if there's any team that you are not going to hazard stack, it's this one. And I think that's really cool for an offensive team, because it definitely just helps in not having your frail attackers get chipped down. Like we mentioned before, I do think just having the Comfey as a Terra captain, I do think, this one was a deep point of controversy for us at the start of the season, and Brandon wanting to take full advantage of that. Honestly, I can respect it to an extent. The only real downside I could find of this team is, although his speed tiers are good, they're very, very cramped together. He doesn't have a speed tier, like outside of Dusclops and to an extent Weezing. As you might be able to see on the screen, the speed tiers are super cramped together, which means that bulkier teams, because they're not going to be able to outspeed anything, can very, very freely just invest in a lot of HP. And that could definitely make it harder for Brandon than to sweep teams than he might be expecting. So that definitely it could be a small downside. But the fact that that is the only real downside I could find is definitely very impressive. So I think Brandon has a very good shot at making it far this season once again. But obviously, Brandon, you did your own draft analysis, but obviously this is your team, so you want to share your thoughts a bit more?
So just for everyone who does not know, I started draft almost a year. Actually, no, not even close to a year ago yet. So something I'm still learning in draft is how to gauge how long a Pokemon will sit on a draft board. If I would have actually put my thinking cap together, I might have waited a little longer for Comfy, and this team might look slightly different, but I made my round one draft pick and I just ran with it from there. I personally just want to, I just want to win this season. So I drafted a team as good as I felt like I could. I really wanted to get my Fire, Water, Grass core, so I, made sure I filled that up with Keldeo, Cinderace. At one point I had Zarude, but then I realized Zarude doesn't really his move pool is not really deep. Like, he gets a lot of moves, but they're all basically the same typing, so it's kind of predictable. Toadscruel, I appreciate that his Spadef, and that he can be physical of max defense, and he can still work, because I've ran into people who've ran max HP, max defense with Assault Vest, and that thing was just the most annoying thing in the world to kill. The only thing I don't like about it is how his ability works with the negative priority on his status moves, because he does have a base 100 speed. So it would be nice if he could actually abuse that, but overall I still think he's going to be great. Everyone, please don't sleep on Pikachu. Just don't do it. And that's all I got to really say about that.
Fair enough. Let's get into ranking this team. I'll start with my opinion. I think personally that this is our first S tier team. This, for me personally, this checks all the boxes. Whether or not it's the best team in the league, I can't say for certain. But for me personally, it checks all the boxes of a good draft team. It has the priority, has amazing hazard removal. The type chart is there. The speed tiers are there. Like I can't. The fact that I had to go out of my way to find that cramped speed tier weakness, and that's really not even a fatal one either. I think this deserves to be S. But I want to hear what you guys think.
Yeah, so obviously this is not the best team because we already talked about that. That aside, I will say I actually do agree with you completely. I think we've had a few nits to pick. So like I said, I think defensive capabilities of this team are a little bit underwhelming, but nothing, it's not like egregious or anything. And I do agree with the speed tier thing, but those are just little things. I think this is a really amazing team, and I agree it belongs in S tier.
Brandon, you agree? You okay with that?
I appreciate y'all's kind words. Me personally, when I ranked my own team, I actually had it in A tier, but I'll accept S tier. Right. I'll accept since it came from y'all. I'll accept it.
Put a lot of pressure on you though. If you don't win this with this team now, you're gonna get stuff for it. I'm joking.
You're gonna go the way of me last season.
Yep. All right.
Hey, bro. I'm the best.
With that being said, we're going to move on to good old Arcaniner, coach of the West Texas Arcanines. I guess I'll start off with this one because I actually really do like this team, and he was before me in the draft, so I have a couple of things to say about this team. First of all, just like with Brandon's team, I looked at this team with the type chart wise, and there is not a single type that this team is weak to. Every single type has a bunch of resistances, even a couple of immunities here and there. So the type chart in this team is, there's literally not one type in which you can just click buttons and force progress on this team. The speed tiers are also amazing. Obviously, there's two Pokemon at higher than base 10, which I think is very important. He's got the Latios at the 110, obviously base 125. With Weavile, and not just that, but unlike with Brandon's team, you can see like 100, 96, 85, 80, 65, and then 60, 50. So there's speed creep in this team is going to provide very little value in that. I also think one really, really cool thing that I think can be a bit undervalued in draft is Arcaniner you're gonna have a tough time sweeping this guy because he has Sturdy Magnezone and Disguise Mimikyu. And these two basically give him free focus sashes, or whatever you want to call it, against any sweeper. These mons can just take any hit and retaliate. So even if something gets to +6, let's say I have a Torterra out and I get to +6/+6, even then he can still revenge kill me. And I think that's a very useful threat. I also think his Terra Captains are amazing. Obviously, an 11-pointer and a 9-pointer, I would say, is about as optimal as it gets for Terra Captain placement. And Mimikyu and Tauros, especially Mimikyu, in my opinion, are big threats. He's got his bulky water. He's got a lot of priority. He's got Weavile's Ice Shard, Mimikyu Shadow Sneak, Rillaboom's Grassy Glide, which is super powerful. I'm pretty sure regular Muck also gets Shadow Sneak, which isn't too bad. And the only real downside I could find is, with the exception of Magnezone, the team is hit neutrally by flying. Now, what does help, and the reason why I didn't really want to mention it as a huge weakness, is because there aren't actually a lot of very potent offensive flying types in this game. Obviously, we talked about Tornadus Therian, but it doesn't really extend far than that. So I do think flying is one of those types that you can be weak to, or can afford to be weak to, rather. But yeah, that's literally, again, the fact that is one of the only weaknesses I could find in this team. I think Arcaniner did a fantastic job with this team, and I can see him going very far. Obviously Arcaniner has yet to reach playoffs in BHDL, but he has gotten very far in other leagues, as far as I know. So this could very well be the redemption of the West Texas Arcanines.
Yeah, I agree. I think, like you, I was kind of struggling to find negatives about this team. I think the amount of offensive pressure this team can apply is insane. You have stuff like the Latios, the Weavile, obviously, that are heavy hitters, and then even Rillaboom can hit pretty hard. Mimikyu, if its Swords Dance is up, Tauros, Blaze, which, by the way, are both incredible picks for Terra Captains. I think the team is really balanced. Like you said, there is no glaring or even slightly glaring weakness as far as type-wise on this team. It is incredibly balanced, and that's one thing that I really look forward to on a team. And the only little bit I have to pick with this team is kind of similar to Brandon's team, is I think this team is not the most impressive defensively. I think the defensive core of the team is, you know, a little bit lacking, and that's just a nit, in my opinion. Like I said, it's not like it's awful by any stretch of the imagination.
Don't underestimate the Vaporeon, is what I'm saying.
Right, of course, yeah. He does have the Vaporeon for defenses, and he does have the, I guess the Tauros could be defensive with Intimidate AV, but it's kind of, honestly, it's kind of okay that his defense, he doesn't have like the walliest of Pokemons, let's put it that way, because like you said, he has stuff like the Mimikyu and the Magnezone and stuff that can't get knocked out in one hit anyway. So I really, really like this team. I think this is one of the best, pun intended. But Brandon?
Yep. Real quick before I go to Brandon, one real quick side note I wanted to say is what I think is really cool about Arcanines' team is the fact that when you look at his team as a whole, but now in the middle of my sentence I forgot what I was going to say. Do you know what? Forget it. Brandon, go on. Sorry.
First fail of the video.
Yeah.
Gotta love it.
Always gotta be me.
But I overall think he has a great team too. Originally, I had critiques about when I first looked at his team at first glance, I thought I saw an ice weakness. But then something I realized is he has an equal amount of resist to the weaknesses he has. So that changed my mind about the team defensively. I think this is a good offensive team because he has things like y'all have mentioned, the Weavile, the Rillaboom. Mimikyu can just set up because of its free focus sash. Tauros can be a problem because it can just Trailblaze on you, and then whatever happens just happens from there. And Latios is always a thing. But overall, I think it's a good team.
Mm-hmm. I think I remember now what I wanted to say. I think another reason why I think Arcanines' team is not even that bad of a slouch defensively is because I do think he's got a lot of good Assault Vest users. Like, for example, Rillaboom, Magnezone, Tauros, and Braviary are all mons that I've used before with Assault Vest sets, and they all do it very well. So especially defensive, it's not even that bad either if he wants to go that route. But that's a little side point. As far as ranking this team, as I mentioned before, easy S tier for me. This could even be the best. I mean, obviously, we're not even halfway done with this. Going to be a long video, this one. But I do think this could honestly be the best team in the league. I really like Arcanines' team.
Yeah, I would agree. I think this definitely belongs in S tier. It's definitely one of the best teams in the league, in my opinion, for sure, and definitely belongs in S tier.
And I also agree with this team belonging in S tier.
Cool. There we go. Arcaniner, you as well. The West Texas Arcanines Redemption. Make it happen, friend. Do it. All right. With that being said, we're going to move on to the California Trailblazers, coached by Pokemaster88. Brandon, you are a very good friend of Chris. So you want to take this one?
I can take this one. Overall, I think that Pokemaster actually drafted a pretty solid team. Now, I like many others might forever wonder if Goldingo was the best first round draft pick, but one thing I like about his team is he can put hazards up on you or put webs up on you, and then Goldingo can just spin block you to death. And if I'm not mistaken, Goldingo also blocks defog, so you're limited on how you can get those things away. And he has a team that, if he has a team that in the right speed tiers can be offensively threatening, because he has the Blastoise, which he's really good with, mind you. He has Ogerpond, who has access to some pretty great moves, such as like knockoff, low kick. He can pivot out. He can also spiky turn on you just to get chip on you. It can be a very threatening mon, and then it's also the only Ogerpond that can hold an item as well. So it's a Pokemon I see him doing very well with. Then he has the Sylveon, who, Spec Sylveon can be a menace. And it doesn't even have to be specs. He can also be like a support set or an AV set, and that thing can be pretty hard to kill and pretty annoying, just like this Gliscor. Hard to kill and pretty annoying. And overall, I think this team is offensively threatening. Now, my only personal nitpick is, even though it's offensively threatening, he does have, let me see, he has he has a weakness to ice. That's the only really nitpick I had, because he's like, Gliscor and Noivern, they both have, they're both 4 times weak. So,
yeah.
If I'm prepping for this team, I wouldn't imagine them both coming to the same game. And then there's also Drapple, who's also 4 times. Wait, that is Drapple, right?
Flapple,
yeah.
That's Flapple.
Oh, Flapple. Okay, that's Flapple. So, he has like 3 Pokemon that are all 4 times weak to a move. A typing that I feel like is kind of common. So I feel like that immediately kind of limits what he's going to bring and makes it easier to prep for ever so slightly. But at the same time, just from experience against playing Chris, I see him doing well with this team. But that was just my only real nitpick, was like that weakness. And even though he has Pokemon that can resist it, like for example Blastoids, the moment he terras, now you're just neutral to it.
I agree. I will pick up on that point and say that in addition to the glaring ice weakness on this team, I also noticed a pretty glaring rock weakness too.
Yep.
So
agreed.
He kind of has, some unchecked weaknesses. That's the biggest negative that I have to say about this team. But those are kind of important, because especially when you have an unchecked rock weakness, because we all know how big of a thing Stealth Rock is. But aside from that, I say that this team looks really solid on paper. It's very balanced. It has a good balance of offensive and defensive threats, so it's got good balance in that respect. Additionally, I will say that the Terra Captain, specifically the Blastoise Terra Captain, is very well placed. Obviously, anytime you have a Shell Smash sweeper that can be either physical or special, like Blastoise can be, because most people don't realize this, but I believe Blastoise only has 2 more points in special attack than it does in physical attack.
Yep,
so
correct.
And its move pool on the physical side is actually pretty good too. So yeah, Blastoise as a Terra Captain is incredible. The Toxicroak and the Flapple are but he had kind of limited options as to the rest of his Terra Captains. Flapple as a Pokemon to me is a little I mean, it's not 2 points for no reason, but aside from that, I do think that the team is very solid. He's got a lot of he's got ways to set hazards. He's got a good amount of ways to remove hazards, and like I said, a good combination of offensive and defensive pressure that can be applied. So I do like this team quite a lot.
Yep. I think obviously for me personally, some of the upsides is obviously the infinite amount of hazards combined with Golden Go. We have spikes on Ogerpon, which the document doesn't display, but Ogerpon does get spikes. Stealth Rock and spikes on the Gliscor, and even Sticky Web on the Vikavolt, which could definitely if you can't remove Sticky Web, you're going to be in for a bad time. I also like the fact that even if he decides not to bring, or if he finds it too risky to send Goldengo into a Defogger, he also has Defiant Ogerpon, which is something that can obviously also punish Defog attempts. Pretty cool. And also punish the use of opposing Sticky Web users if he wants to. Maybe you can go like Scarf with Defiant and then punish an opposing Sticky Web. I'm just thinking out loud. Another thing I like about Chris's team is the speed tiers. Like I mentioned before, 2 Pokemon with a speed tier above 110. He's got the Ogerpon, which sits exactly 110, and the Noivern at 123. And the other Pokemon are also pretty well scrambled together. There's the 95, the 85, the 75, the 60. That's pretty much as perfect as it gets. And one thing that I think I really want to mention is that Chris's Pokemon are all very versatile. And what I mean by that is Golden Go can be offensive and defensive. Blastoise can be offensive and defensive. Gliscor can be offensive and defensive. Same goes for Sylveon, same goes for Noivern. The only real Pokemon on this team that only really play one role are the Armarouge, the Vikavolt, and the Flapple, because Toxicroak also has both a usable attack stat and special attack stat. So even though that thing is always going to be offensive, you never really quite know what side of the spectrum it's going to hit you from. I also think that the Blastoise is a very solid Terra Captain once again. I don't think too highly of Flapple either, but I do really like Toxicroak as a Terra Captain. I do think this Mon, like I mentioned before, it does hit hard on both sides of the spectrum, and it being able to get rid of its 4 times weakness to Psychic, among other things, can definitely help. And also lets it, obviously hit some things that it can otherwise be walled by. The only real downside to this team, like we mentioned before, 3 Pokemon 4 times weak to Ice, can be a bit of an issue. Also the Rock's weakness. But he does have a pretty solid Rapid Spinner and Blastoise, so that does definitely help. And also a Defogger in Noivern. I do also can see him being able to abuse heavy duty boots well. And one thing that the only real glaring weakness that we haven't really touched upon is outside of weak quick attack options, his only real form of priority is Toxicroak's Sucker Punch. And that's not bad, but the fact that that's his only real strong priority, again, outside of like maybe Pixelate boosted quick attack from Sylveon, can definitely hold him back. Now, having good speed tiers to back that up is definitely a plus side again, but I do personally really value having a lot of priority on your team, and Chris's only priority move that is above 40 base power is Toxicroak Sucker Punch. That could come back to bite him. But we'll see how he pilots it. I do think it's a very solid team. Let's get into ranking it, lads. What are we thinking?
Be honest.
Same here. I think it's a big threat.
So you guys said A tier?
It is.
It didn't really pick up on my side.
I think it is a big threat. I think we both said that.
All right, I think it is a big threat as well. So we're gonna move Pokemaster up to the A tier. And with that being said, we're gonna move on to the second person in this call, which is the Leaf Agents, coached by yours truly. Again, if you want to see my thoughts on this team, please go and watch my draft analysis. There will be a link to it in the description down below. But Captain, you want to start off with this one?
Oh, yes, I do. Where do I begin with? No, I'm just kidding. Okay. All right. So, this team, I have to say, I do like it quite a bit, but I also have nits to pick. So here we go. And I didn't even try for that to rhyme, but it did. So, here we go. So, one of the first things I want to say about this team is offense. So, obviously, Scorpion's known for his hyper offense, and this team is no exception, in my opinion.
Yep.
The offensive pressure that this team can apply is incredible. Obviously, you have stuff like the Iron Valiant, the Iron Crown, the Hisuian Samurott. I'm probably just going to read the whole list right now, but that's fine. The Torterra, even the Thunderous Therian, the Hisuian Typhlosion even. So yeah, all the offensive pressure that this team is capable of applying is incredible. So that's the biggest thing for me. Second thing I have to say, Terra Captains, I believe, are very well placed. Obviously, you have the Torterra, which just barely made it under the line to be able to Terra this season.
Yay.
Yes, we have that. And then I also like the Hisuian Typhlosion as a Terra Captain as well. I think that's really well placed, too. Obviously, he has some hazard setting capabilities as well, like the Hisuian Samurott, and other things, Bronzong for screens and whatnot. Obviously, hazard removal like the Cyclizar and so forth. Now, I will say on the flip side of this, the negatives that I have about this team are, I think, and this is something that I kind of touched upon with other teams, but I think it's more prevalent on this team, is I don't really see a super reliable defensive core on this team, and that kind of goes hand in hand with the hyper offense theme, right? So typically, if you're a hyper offensive team, you kind of sacrifice your defensive capabilities to be more offensive, and I think that's kind of evident in this team. So like, you do have stuff like the Bronzong, or potentially the Pheasantipede is kind of tanky, although limited as it may be. But aside from that, I guess Torterra can be kind of tanky. I don't see like a lot of walls on this team. I don't see a lot of offensive capability on this team. Additionally, I think that this roster is a little bit on the shallow side, because we do have the elephant in the room that I haven't mentioned, that of course is the Morgrim.
Yep.
At the bottom of the list there, which, although it is a Terra Captain, I kind of struggle to see many scenarios that's going to come to a game, especially when you also have like a premier fairy type in the Iron Valiant and a premier dark type in the Hisuian Samurott. So I struggle to see when Morgrim comes to a game, to be completely honest with you. But also the Pheasantipede, as I mentioned, although I am a huge fan of Pheasantipede. Personally, I acknowledge that it's kind of a limited Pokemon as to what it can do. Specifically, the moveset is pretty limited. So I do see this team being a little on the shallow side, roster-wise. But other than that, like I said, the amount of offensive pressure this team can bring is insane, and I do think it's a really, really threatening team. No questions. But Brandon, your thoughts?
I also think that this is a really threatening team, but I also agree that I feel like this team did for the sake of offense, did sacrifice some defense. And then there's just certain things that I do like how versatile the team can be, though. Like Iron Valiant, you can be special or physical. Torterra can Shell Smash, but there's also other options. Same for Vezendipity. A lot of people gloss over the fact that its attack stat is actually higher than its special attack stat, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. Base 91 attack.
But they're both just high enough that you can, make use of either or. And at first I had like certain nitpicks about like defensive. I mean, I do agree with something Captain said about the defensive cores, like certain things I noticed, like for example, this team doesn't really switch something like a common typing to me, which is fire. To me, this team only doesn't really switch in too well to fires. Only, let me see, 3.
Aside from Hisuian and Typhlosion.
Yeah.
Samurott, which is like, those aren't the most bulky of Pokemon, even Cyclizar, which again kind of feeds to the hyper offense.
And then, like for example, Hisuian Typhlosion, even though I do think the team is versatile, there's also certain things that it's like, I think is predictable, like Hisuian Typhlosion, for example, you kind of know what to expect from that. Cyclizar, if it's a rapid switch, since it's going to be his only form of hazard removal, you kind of know what to expect from that. But he has other Pokemon that can be versatile though. So I do think that's a positive note about the team. He's going to definitely apply a lot of offensive pressure throughout the season because most of his Pokemon, they hit you so hard that it's kind of hard to switch into anyway.
Yep.
Kind of like that old, the best defense is a good offense, or is it the best offense is a good defense?
Yeah,
whichever one. In this case, we'll say it's the best offense is a good defense.
Yeah, anyway. That's me in a nutshell. So I guess I'll share my. Thank you guys for the insight on the team. I do appreciate that. One thing I definitely do want to comment on though is the fact that I do disagree with the fact that this team has no defense, because I did some. Obviously, this is not the first generation, or this is the first generation in which Torterra got access to Shell Smash. I have used this Pokemon in lower tiers defensively before, and even on the special side, which is its weaker side, this mon can tank some hits. And I've even tried a physically defensive Torterra in OU before, and this thing 1v1s like King Gambit and Great Tusk and things like that, especially if it doesn't have Ice Spinner. So I do think Torterra is a very solid defensive mod, especially as a Terra Captain. Obviously, it does have those weaknesses, especially a 4 times weakness to Ice. Being able to change that typing.
I think I did give Torterra its defensive props. I just have to throw.
Yeah, you did. You absolutely did. But I think you didn't call it super good, and I disagree with that. I think Torterra can actually be an amazing wall when it wants to. Now, of course, this is my favorite Pokemon of all time. I'm going to be biased towards how good it is, but that's just my personal take on it. And the reason why I quite like my own team is because I'm a big quality over quantity person. I did intentionally try to go for only 10 months max, and I do think that this team is 9 solid Pokemon plus Morgrem. I did explain in my draft analysis why I did get Morgrem, and the reason being that I just think that the Dark Fairy typing just doesn't make my team's defensive structure worse. It was never going to make it better as an NFE, but I just didn't want it to make it worse. And the fact that my team has 3 Fairy types and 2 Steel types means that Dragon types are not going to have a good time against it. So one of the most spammable offensive types already is kind of negated against this team. But with that said, my personal biggest plus on my own team is just how versatile these mons are. And what I mean by that is Iron Valiant can go mixed, Iron Crown can be a sweeper or a choice item user, Samurott can be Scarf, Band, SD Focus Sash, Assault Vest, Torterra can be defensive, Band, Scarf, Shell Smash, whatever the hell you want. Cyclizar can even be offensive because it does have a very deep move pool with good coverage, so even that thing you can go Specs or Ban if you wanted to, like maybe someone expecting a passive Rapid Spinner and you blast them with a Specs Overheat or Draco Meteor. Vezendipity definitely a little bit more on the shallow side. Obviously that mon is just a special wall. Base 91 attack is good and it does limit its passivity, but it doesn't eliminate it completely. And I do think that Bronzong especially, as a wall, I drafted Bronzong because of its Steel Psychic typing and its good abilities. But I do think that, and I did mention in my draft analysis as well, the fact that this thing shares a typing with Iron Crown can limit the fact that, if I want to bring Iron Crown to a game, I might not want to bring Bronzong. But I do think that like my team is very hard to prepare for, just because of how many different roles they can play. For example, if you expect a Specs Valiant and it's Booster SD, then you lose the game. If you expect a Defensive Torterra and it Shell Smashes in your face, you can lose the game. So, and I'm a personal, really big fan of just like bringing different sets every week. As a matter of fact, I do think I did that a bit too much in Season 1, or Season 2, sorry, because I ended up just like switching it up when, for example, I should have brought one set more often if it just looked good another week. But I personally do think highly of my team. Whether or not I place it in S tier, I'm not sure. But I do think you guys are going to disagree with that anyway, so that's probably not where it's going to end up. Jesus. So yeah, let's get into ranking of this team. Me personally, again, I'm leading between S and A, but feel free to throw your thoughts out.
Well,
see if I changed your mind on something.
Unlike what you thought, I actually always thought it was an S tier team. I always thought it was an S tier team.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to disagree with you guys. I think, well, I do agree with the point that you made as far as, like, the versatility within the offense. I agree with that 100%. So there's a lot of versatility within the offense of this team. I agree 100% with that. But for me, like I said, well, I do acknowledge there you have Pokemon like Torterra, Bronzong that can be defensively powerful. To me, it comes back to I don't see the best of defense on this team, which again I think is to be expected with a team that's more hyper offense. So me personally, I would not put this in S tier. I would say this is 100% an A tier team in my opinion, but I wouldn't. But the combination of the lack of robust defense combined with that the roster seems a bit on the shallow side to me I would say A tier, but that's just me.
Okay. I think because of the fact that me and Brandon both said S tier, I'm going to put it in S tier for now. I'm going to put it in low S tier, and then again, if at the end we can try to... I think at the end what we'll do is we'll very quickly compare it to the rest of S tier, and then if we think it deserves to go down, we'll move it down.
Hey man, if I'm outvoted, I'm outvoted. That's the way democracy works.
Yep,
so.
That is very true. All right, Leaf agents are going S tier for now. If we feel the need to change it, we are going to. And if you want to, if it makes you feel better, Cap, this does put more pressure on me to do well this season. So there you go.
I never felt bad in the first place, so we're all good.
Fair enough. Thank you. All right, with that being said, we're going to move on to another British underdog. Not just Weavile, but we're going to look at the Hyndburn Hydrapples with their new team logo, coached by Caddy. And I guess I'll start with it. Actually, no, Brandon, you can start off with this one.
So, first thing I want to say that I like about this team is, for the most part, I remember when I was looking at his team, remember thinking to myself, he has a lot of, doesn't really have a lot of a lot of OU Mons, and the strong Mons he has on his team aren't even like in those top tiers. But despite them being like lower tiered from my perspective, I looked at his team and thought this was like a really like solid looking team personally. The only thing I really disliked really was like his I don't think he has like a real like his speed tier, because he only has one Pokemon that's over base 100, and even then it's still below that to what I feel like is like base 110 is like kind of like the threshold you want to be at.
Yep.
And none of his Pokemon are up there. But at the same time, he has priority in the forms of like, Donphan, Komo-O, Infernape with it, Iron Fist, Mach Punch, what's this thing? Basculegion with the Aqua Jet. So he has ways to counteract that. And I feel like this team is actually good on the I feel like defensively this team can potentially be hard to crack too, because he has things like the Slow King, which depending on the set can eat hits. Same for Donphan. And if I'm not mistaken, Hydrapple has respectable defenses. And I personally think Magneton is a great Eviolite Pokemon. Mm-hmm. And of course the Alcremie, which can, if you let that thing just set up on you, it can be annoying. So that's another thing. I think he has good Terra Captains. Well, I don't really know the most about Volbeat, but I do know that Alcremie, if you let it, right Terra, let it set up, it can just it can just go through your team. And Porygon too, I think, is a pretty solid Pokemon. I personally think he has a good team. Now, at the same time, I don't think it's like the strongest team, like from an offensive standpoint. because he does have a lot of lower tier mons. But at the same time, I feel like this is a team that this is a team he's gonna be able to work with and show us something with.
Yeah. I'd like to add on to that. I do think you made a very good point. That was the first thing I noticed at this team. Base 108 being the highest speed tier is not ideal, but it does make up for it in its defense. And not only does this team have a lot of defense, but it also has a lot of longevity because there are 2 Regenerator Pokemon on this team, being the Hydrapple and the Slowking. And these Pokemon honestly just stay alive forever. It is a shame that Hydrapple can't Terra in this league. That definitely would have made it even better. But I do think highly of Hydrapple in the sense that it's quite a versatile mon because of its great attack set and also awesome coverage. Moves like Earth Power, Hydro Pump, you name it. It's quite a big powerhouse both offensively and defensively. It's a great Assault Vest user too. I do think his Terra Captains are well placed as well. I'm not very, we always talk about Pokemon like Morgrem and in this case Volbeat. They're kind of whatever Terra Captains if you have leftover points. But the Alchemy and the Porygon 2 are very big threats if they, because they're very bulky, right? Obviously Porygon 2, especially this thing can soak up a nuclear bomb. It's very, very bulky, and if it's a Terra Captain, it can also change its typing to resist that nuclear bomb if it wants to. It does make it a little bit reliant on a Violite because, so obviously it's a wall that doesn't take knockoff very well, which can be crippling. But then he also has the Alchemy, which is a wall that's not reliant on a Violite and that resists knockoff. So he can do something. And something that I also forgot to mention in a few of the other teams, which I really like about some of the teams that we've ranked higher, is the fact that on this team as well, Porygon 2 and Alchemy could absolutely show up to the same game because they have naturally good typings. You can just bring Porygon 2 and just expect it to do well with its normal typing and then just Terra Alchemy or other way around. And so yeah, the only real criticism I have of this team, I do think very highly of the offensive mons of this team. I think Infernape and Basculegion especially, even with the Terra ban on Basculegion, I do think it's a big threat, especially with adaptability. I feel like people really sometimes underestimate how strong this Pokemon is. And obviously the Komodo is there. It's like Komodo is obviously a late round pick, but as someone who preps for Caddy, please do not forget about that Komodo because it is a big threat. And obviously can boost on both the physical side with Dragon Dance, as well as the special side with Throat Spray strategies or Clangarous Soul. So I don't think this is the best team in the league by any stretch, but for a first-time coach, Caddy did amazing, I think. But what do you think, Cap?
The first thing that jumps up to me about this team is this is certainly a more defensive team than it is an offensive team, right? Like you guys said. Obviously, the defensive core of the Hydrapple, the Slowking, the Donphan, the Porygon 2. I feel like I'm reading the whole list here.
Yep.
The Alcremie. But yeah, this is a much more defensive team than it is offensive. Now, it does have some pretty strong offensive threats like the Como-O, the Basculegion, the Infernape. But overall, I don't know. I gotta say, this team feels a little underwhelming to me, to be honest with you guys. I think, I see the Como-O, okay, but, aside from that, I don't see, anything that, really, really, really puts in the work or hits hard or is really gonna, sweep a team. I get Basculegion and Infernape are good Pokemon. They hit hard, but, I don't know. This team, when I look at this roster, 2 words jump out to me: defensive and also at the same time kind of underwhelming. So I'm not going to say I don't.
You mean more like passivity as well?
Yeah. So
okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So it doesn't seem like this team seems much more passive than it does proactive, and that's the kind of thing that can easily get you swept when you're in a league with all these offensive teams. So I don't hate this team, but I think that I definitely have some issues with how I think it's going to run, especially compared to the other teams we have, especially compared to the more offensive teams. Additionally, I noticed that there is a pretty obvious flying and ice weakness on this team that's kind of unchecked. So he's got a lot of Pokemon that I see that seem to be to ice and flying, and he doesn't seem to have a lot to switch in on those attacks. I do like the Terra Captains. I will say the Porygon 2 is a great Terra Captain because Porygon 2 is one of the best defensive Pokemon in the game, in my opinion, just because of that Eviolite. It's just so hard to crack.
Yep.
And obviously the double Regenerator with the Hydrapple and the Galarian Slowking. But like I said, I'm I'm not like the hugest fan of this team, but that's, I think, part of the reason is because I'm not a big fan of the defensive play style, to be completely honest with you guys. I'm either more bulky offense or straight offense is more what I lean into. So when I see defensive teams like this, I see more of like setup fodder, you know.
That's fair.
But yeah, overall, it is a solid team. I would probably place it somewhere around the B tier, to be honest with you guys, but I wouldn't put it any higher than that. But what do you guys think?
All right, then let's get into ranking this team. Sorry, did you want to say something else?
Oh, another thing I wanted to mention just real quick is, yeah, I mean, I guess it can be a little bit shallow too. Like the the Magneton is kind of whatever, the Volbeat is whatever pick, but that's just wanted to add that there. That's something else I hadn't considered. But go on.
Let's see. Captain said B. I fully agree with that. I also think it's a solid B tier team. Brandon, what do you think?
I think this team is I feel like it could be either. I feel like it could be either in B or high C.
I think because all right, that's fair. I think because me and Cap both said B, and you also to an extent, we'll put it in B for now. And again, we could always look at it later. And then for the next team, we're going to look at another newcomer, which is going to be Anastasia, the coach of Team Aquamarine. So I guess I'll start off with this one. First of all, this Pokemon has Dragapult, or this team has Dragapult. Let's just get that out of the way, the obvious elephant in the room. Any team with Dragapult is automatically viable in my eyes. Even I've seen some pretty terrible teams in draft before, like on YouTube, for example, and even some of the teams that were a bit more mediocre still ended up doing well just because of how broken Dragapult is. And I can also see that even though this Pokemon is insanely good, some people may also hate it to an extent. And our captain here has the privilege of having to prep against it in week 1, so good luck. Let's see. I also think that this week, this team, I actually put it another in the prep doc as well, and it's not weak to very many types. There are a couple of not very well checked dark and rock weaknesses, obviously the latter being important because of Stealth Rock, but there is a very, very good hazard remover on this team, being the Corviknight, which I do think is a very reliable hazard remover. I also just think very highly of Corviknight in general as a Pokemon because of its amazing typing. I do think also, speaking of the Corviknight, that the defensive structure on this team, even just the combination of Clodsire and Corviknight, is really, really solid, because there's like, obviously Clodsire is UU these days, I'm pretty sure. But obviously there's a reason why at the start of Scarlet and Violet, for the longest time, balanced teams and even stall teams used, okay, so not stall teams actually, but balanced and bulky offense teams used to include these two Pokemon together all the time, because they're weak to very different things. Obviously Clodsire is immune to the electric attacks that Corviknight is weak to, and to an extent other things around, like for example Clodsire is weak to ground, which Corviknight is immune to. So these two Pokemon by themselves already create an amazing defensive core, and that's not even alone either, because the Araquanid also, for those who don't know, Araquanid has a base 122 special defense, so it takes hits very well, amazing Assault Vest user, and Screamtail and Incineroar also can definitely play defensive roles very well. Then we have Dragapult, which I mentioned earlier, and also the Gyarados, which is the elephant in the room when it comes to Terra Captains. Very, very big Dragon Dance threat. You might be able to see what it does, but realistically, what are you going to do about it? And I really do think that this team, it just has sweepers. Also the Meloetta, which I'd even get to, but this team has sweepers and the support to make it work. It has Sticky Web, it has a couple of hazard options. Screamtail is a cleric, it can Wish Pass, it can paralyze Pokemon with its amazing speed tier, it can set screens very well. So I do also really think, I don't normally think too highly of Screamtail in draft, but I do think on this team, it works very, very well. And the only real downside that I spotted on this team is the fact that because of how strong Gyarados is a Terra Captain, I do think the roster can maybe be considered a little bit shallow, because I don't see how many games Thwackey and Raichu, especially Thwackey, are going to show up to. Because again, I think if you are, it's a little bit similar to me with Iron Leaves in Season 1. Yes, I had Drifloon and Venomoth as Terra Captains, but when you have a Pokemon as powerful as Iron Leaves, it's realistically going to be a bit of an opportunity cost to not bring Iron Leaves, and the same thing applies here, I feel, with Gyarados. So that's my only real criticism at the team. But for someone who did this as their first ever draft team, I think it's really good.
Yeah, I agree with you. So when I look at this team, I'm very impressed with it. I do not um, envy the person who has to play an unknown coach with a team as solid as this in week 1 of the league. Oh wait, that's me. Yeah, so I certainly have my work cut out for me. So I'll give you guys a little bit of an insight as I've been trying to prep for this team.
Of course, yeah.
Without giving away any of the secrets, of course. This has been quite difficult for me to prep for, I will say, because I, number one, have to say I love the balance on this team. I love how you have such big offensive threats like the Dragapult, the Gyarados, paired with such great defensive threats like the Corviknight, the Araquanid, the Clodsire, paired the Screamtail as well, paired with stuff like the Incineroar and the Meloetta that are both. They're offensive and defensive powerhouses. I think the Terra Captains are well placed as far as the Gyarados and the Raichu. Although I will say, I think she probably could have made better use of that second Terra Captain and done Gyarados and Araquanid instead. That would have made more sense to me.
Oh yeah, heavily agree.
Because I have to agree with, I have to agree with what you said is, and is Thwackey going to come to a game? I don't know. I don't see that happening. To be completely honest. Raichu I could see coming in certain situations, but again, depending on the situation, are you really going to choose to Terra Raichu over Gyarados? I kind of doubt that, but I guess it'll just depend on the match. I do completely agree with the one, all Thwackies aside, the one real criticism of the team, which is the roster seems a bit shallow. And again, I think it is just a Thwacky looking at me that just makes the roster seem shallow, to be honest. But like, if I just put my finger over Thwacky, which I'm going to do right now, and I'm looking at the team here, I don't see weak links. I don't see any glaring, unchecked weaknesses. I don't see any problem with this team, and I've been scrutinizing this team quite a bit to try and prep for it, and I don't really see any glaring weaknesses that this team has. That's a real problem for me. Trying to prepare for it, obviously, but speaks to the great design of the team. So I'm a big fan of this team. But Brandon, your thoughts?
I also think this is a pretty solid team. Now, this might just be one of my personal things, but something I like on teams is when you have ways to pivot in and out. And I like how on her team she has a lot of different ways to pivot in and out, and the Pokemon that can be doing the pivoting, like the Corviknight, the Incineroar, the Dragapult. Incineroar and Corviknight are probably going to take a hit and safely go into whatever she needs it to go into, and then Dragapult's the fastest thing in the game, so you're on the board besides Regieleki. So I mean, you're safe there. And I also like how defensive this team can be as well. Like, while y'all have been talking, I've been thinking about how the heck I'm going to play against it, and I can already tell you, I have no clue. Like, very.
Now, welcome to my pain.
Her team is very strong defensively, and something I thought at first I thought like maybe she had like a slight dark weakness, like for like the sucker punches on Polt and then Meloetta and stuff. But then I thought about something. Polt, if she brings like support sets for Polt, like this thing can just wisp you, T-wave you. Like, Polt is so versatile that Pokemon alone you have to prep for, like, on its own by itself. So I see this for this to be her first team. I feel like this is a pretty solid team overall.
Absolutely.
And the last thing that I want to point out about her team that I also really like, her defensive mons, like Corviknight, Clodsire, and even Screamtail. Not only are they bulky and can take hits, but they can also recover and then just be annoying and just be overall hard to get rid of. And yeah, I think it's a pretty solid team.
Yep. The only last kind of thing I wanted to note is because there's not that many Hazard Setters on this team. Obviously, there is Stealth Rock on Clodsire and the Sticky Webs on the Araquanid, but Anastasia does not. Wait, I was about to say there's not a Ghost type, and then I forgot there's a Dragapult. I'm an idiot. Forget about that. Let's move on to ranking this team.
Fail number 3.
Yeah. For some reason, it was in my head. For some reason in my head, I was like, oh wait, Dragapult is a pure Dragon type, right? No, it's a Ghost type. I don't know why I thought that, but you know what? I'm not even gonna cut it out because it's funny. What do you guys think ranking wise?
I think it's an S tier team.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's an S tier team. I struggle to find any real criticisms of this team aside from, like I said, I think that the roster might be a little shallow, but other than that, just the powerhouses on this team are just the offensive and defensive powerhouses on this team are just undeniable. So I gotta say S.
Yeah, I think me personally, I was leaning towards high A or S, but I definitely, if you guys say S, I'm more than willing to agree with that. I'm going to move it to S. And honestly, any team with Dragapult, like I mentioned before, is automatically S. So do you know what? It makes perfect sense as well. Then we're going to move on to, let's see, who's next? Next up is going to be our other commissioner, not with us, unfortunately, right now, being Emerald Miner, coach of the Demewlition Force. Cap, you want to start off with this one? You're very, obviously, you and Emerald have quite the BHDL history, so take it away.
Yes, we do. The fabled Emerald Miner from the Discord server. Here we go. So, most prominent YouTuber in this league. Just have to throw it out there, give him his credit. But anyway, yeah, Emerald Miner's team. Here we go. So things that stand out to me about this team at first glance is the amount of offensive pressure that this team can apply, coupled with the powerhouses defensively as well. So you've got something like Gouging Fire, which is incredible both offensively and defensively, type-wise, move pool the whole 9 yards. Same can be said for Mew to a lesser extent. Obviously, it's got those, base 100s all around. Great Pokemon offensively and defensively. Just obviously, you never know what to expect from Mew as it learns basically every in the game. So,
yeah, pretty much.
So, that's the thing. But then you've also got threats like the Azumarill, which obviously can belly drum, huge power. We all know what Azumarill does, so very, very potent. Lucario, one of the strongest Terra captains in the game, I think, or at least for our purposes in our league, one of the strongest Pokemon that's still allowed to Terra. So yeah, you can't go wrong with that Terra Normal extreme speed. As you all know, I know, you can't go wrong with that.
Yep.
But also you got stuff like the Serena that's pretty bulky, can spin. You have the Ting Lu that can set all the hazards in the world, very tanky as well. The Drifblim as well to remove hazards. Zebstrika is kind of whatever to me. Reverum is kind of whatever to me. Although I know those Pokemon do have uses. They're not super impressive. I like the Cryogonal just because it's got, for a lower tier Pokemon, it's got a lot of value in my opinion with that ground immunity, which is going to feed into one of my criticisms of the team. Actually, my biggest criticism of the team is I feel like he has a lot of unchecked fire and ground weaknesses on this team. And I think that comes largely due to the fact that he's got that dual steel typings with the Lucario and the Reverum. One of my biggest criticisms of this team, to be honest with you guys, aside from that it kind of goes hand in glove with the typing thing, is that I think Reverum just does not feel like it fits on this team. I feel like it feels like the synergy with all the other Pokemon, like the Gouging Fire, the Mew, the Azumarill, the Lucario, even the Serena, the Ting Lu, like just all these Pokemon feel like they have so much synergy with each other, and then there's just Reverum sitting there, and it's like, wait, I already have Lucario.
Yeah, that was my thing. I like it.
So,
how many games is Reverum going to be better than Lucario? Is my question.
Exactly, and I know he tried to fix that by making Reverum a Terra Captain, but I just honestly, again, not to give more Terra Captain advice to people I'm going to have to play this season, but I guess that's the theme of today. I think Serena would be a better Terra Captain for him, to be completely honest with you. I think even I just got to make sure the points are going to add up, so I'm not going to say that. But yeah, I think Serena would be a better Terra Captain, honestly. But yeah, I do like this team. I like the combination of offensive and defensive power. I like the ability to set hazards and remove so easily on this team, which is kind of Emerald Miner's signature.
Yep.
But yeah, just that Reverum I'm just looking at that Reverum, like this thing just does not belong on this team. But other than that, I like this team a lot.
It's very fair criticisms. Brandon, what do you think?
I think that he has a pretty strong offensive team because he has the Gouging Fire. Mew can literally be anything. Azumarill, then y'all already touched on Lucario, and then if Reverum ever can get his favorite move up, him too. But I just feel like that just invites Mirror Herb users, so even I have my little icks about it being a Terra captain on this specific team. But I think he has a nice balance of offense and defense outside of the unchecked fire weaknesses that I see, because he has 4 things that are weak to fire and 2 of them are his Terra captain. So now you're just forced to Terra, which to me is never a good position. Well, it's never a good feeling to have,
Mm-hmm.
But I think he has a pretty nice team. He has a good amount of hazard removal, 2 defoggers, 2 rapid spinners, good amount of bolt. It's just to me the only thing that's throwing me off is just the fire, that unchecked fire weakness. But
yeah,
overall solid team.
That's very fair. I do agree with both of you guys. I do think that, I do think Reverum is an excellent Terra captain by itself. I just think if it would have been on any other team, it would have been a lot better, because on this team, it just gets outshined by Lucario for the most part. Now, I don't doubt Emerald Miner's ability to get creative with this thing, and I definitely think he will put in some work with it. But realistically speaking, I do think overall it gets outshined by the Lucario a little bit. Some things I have to note about this team. First of all, Gouging Fire. That mon is just insane in draft, in my opinion. It's also a bit of a one-man army. Obviously, it's not quite Dragapult, but it's insane speed. Insane attack, defense, and HP just make it a very... I can see Emerald is kind of built around Gouging Fire, and I think he's done that quite well, despite not even having a Sun Squad. Another thing that I quite like about this team, which doesn't apply to every team, including my own, is that this team... this roster is very deep. Even the Reverum can have some niches, and outside of that, even Cryogonal and Zebstrika are very solid mons that could show up to every week. Especially Zebstrika on this team, I think I really like as a lower tier mon, because it fixes Emerald Miner's only real problem, in my opinion, being the fact that it's only speed tier above 110. I have obviously watched his draft analysis, and he also kind of we drafted a little bit alongside each other. His plan definitely was to have lots of longevity and more sort of bulk on the team to make up for that. And I definitely do see that. I don't think he's done a terrible job with that at all. I do think the Cryogonal can be a little bit redundant, because the main thing that Cryogonal is good at, in my opinion, is being a low tier rapid spinner. But he has Serena. Now that's a plus and a negative at the same time, because I do personally think very highly of Serena. I think it's a very solid mon, both offensively and defensively. It can recover with synthesis, and its ability, Queenly Majesty, is one of the best in the game. Absolutely. So I do agree also with what Captain said. I do think that maybe Serena would have been a better Terra captain, just so you can get even more out of it offensively. Because again, Queenly Majesty is just an insanely good ability, and the fact that removes another whole aspect of how you commonly deal with certain Pokemon is taken away from it. So in that sense, that's amazing. Like you guys mentioned, his ground weakness is very prevalent, that's for sure. And like you mentioned, there's also a bit of a fire weakness as well. What does help is that the Reverum does have the filter ability, so it does not take as much damage from fire moves as you might expect. But that doesn't mean that, for example, a really strong fire type on this team can definitely click buttons. And what also doesn't help is that most strong fire types in this game are special, and that is Gouging Fire's weaker side. So even though it might be 4 times resisted, Gouging Fire could definitely even be worn out over time. And obviously you generally don't even want to rely on your main sweeper to take the hits for you in the first place. However, I do think this team is amazing. I'm going to say it. I think Emerald Miner has consistently, both in Season 1 and Season 2, made me believe he has the best team in the whole league. After what you guys said, I'm not sure if I still believe best team in the whole league, but it's definitely an S tier, at least for me.
Yeah, I hate to disagree with you again, but I'm going to have to disagree with you again.
That's fine.
I'm looking at this team, Well, I say it half sarcastically. I don't hate to disagree with anybody. That's what I do. But nonetheless, I don't see this as an S tier team. To be honest, I think it's a solid A tier team for the aforementioned reasons. I think. And again, I have to just mention this real quick. I know we've all been kind of taking a huge shit on Reverum. I do like Reverum as a Pokemon. I think it's actually a very underrated Pokemon. I think it's Pokemon. I just don't think it fits on this team, especially as a Terra Captain. Having said that, I do say I think this team belongs in A just because, like I said, that massive unchecked fire weakness I think is going to be a big problem for him. The ground weakness to a lesser extent, but still, I think the ground weakness is a little glaring too. So. But yeah, so for those reasons, obviously he's got all the utility. He's Emerald Miner, so he's always going to have all the utility in the world at his disposal.
Yep.
But for me, I can't see putting a team with those glaring type weaknesses in S, so I'd have to say A.
Okay, Brandon?
I'm gonna have to agree with Captain B-Nard. I personally think this is a A tier, like a high A tier team at that. But I do believe this team belongs in the A tier. Because, like, as y'all have mentioned before, Lucario kind of just outshines Reverum. Doesn't mean Reverum can't come, but, it's more times than not, you kind of expect Lucario, especially since Lucario can be physical, special, or even mixed, since it gets priority on both sides. Granted, one thing I will give Reverum over Lucario, I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure Reverum can take hits slightly better than Lucario can.
Mainly because of filter, but yes.
But outside of that, I do think this is a high A tier team, though.
No, I definitely agree with you guys' points. That's very, very fair. All right, Emerald Miner is going in A. And I need to quickly check who we have after that. Aha! Let's round off the commissioner team, folks. It is time for the Philadelphia Pidgeys, coached by the captain. So,
Yes, indeed.
Time for you to wrap. I guess I'll start off with this one because I watched your draft analysis this morning, so it's kind of fresh in my memory. First of all, B-Nard is one of the only people in this season that did not get sniped, which is very, very impressive because me and a lot of other coaches had plenty of picks sniped off of them. And the reason why I bring it up is because I can see it. I can see that you had a plan and it worked out because I looked at this team's strengths and weaknesses, and there's a lot. First of all, calm down, Scorp. It has a great type chart, and that, like a lot of few other highly ranked teams, there is very little types that this team is weak to. In particular, there is one, which is Ghost. There is obviously Arboliva, which is a normal type, but outside of that, there is not a single dark type on this team, which means that if a very strong ghost type comes into this team, like Basculegion, it can honestly click buttons against it, especially if Arboliva is not in the game. And if you do bring Arboliva, it's not a terrible Pokemon at all. As a matter of fact, I really like Arboliva. It's one of my favorite Pokemon from Generation 9. But it is still a lower tier Pokemon for a reason. If you have to bring that Pokemon against every single ghost type, that could be a small issue. This team has great priority options as well. Like I mentioned before, I do very much highly value priority. You've got Sizzler's Bullet Punch, you've got Sneasler's Fake Out, which can... and the reason why I mentioned Fake Out is I don't think Fake Out is a particularly good priority move, but Sneasler does it alongside Poison Touch, and that definitely does make it a lot better and worth mentioning in my opinion. There's obviously Arcanine's Extreme Speed as well. That's arguably the best one. And let's not forget Pincurchin gets Sucker Punch either, which can definitely help stop a sweeper that is low on health. Now this team, one thing I do think is that this team is a little bit more... I don't think it's on the shallow side at all, but I do think that the Pokemon on this team, most of them are rather predictable. And what I mean by that is Goodra is a bulky attacker. It's not fast, it doesn't do very many different things. Rotom, for the most part, I feel like on this team is going to be a wall. Yes, it can go offensive, but I'm down to prove for you to prove me wrong. But I do think, just like when I had Rotom and when someone else had Rotom in Season 2, I can't remember who it was, but this Pokemon is mostly good defensively. A lot in Ninetales, obviously, mainly just a Specs, or not, sorry, an Assault, not Assault Vest. Light Clay, that's the word I was looking for. A Screen Setter, because its special attack is honestly pretty low. Arcanine has is a physical attacker, and Pincurchin and Arboliva are mostly just bulky terrain setters, and Mudsdale is a wall. So I do think this team is, like every single Pokemon individually is great, but I do think that prepping for certain sets is going to be, or like you can reasonably see coming what they're going to do. But that doesn't necessarily have to be like a big weakness. That's just something I noticed. Terra Captains are excellent. I do think that an 11-pointer plus a 9-pointer is the most optimal way you can place Terra Captains, and I'm super proud of the fact that you made Goodra a Terra Captain. I love that. And the only other real downside I noticed is that there's only one speed tier above 120. Now that's not a huge deal because speed control for this team, because of the fact that that Pokemon at 120 is Sneasler, which has Unburden, there's going to be very little teams that can actually outrun Sneasler, so you do have the speed control. So it's not a huge deal, but definitely, especially in games where you don't feel like running Unburdened Sneasler and you want to go like a choice item, it might come back to bite you. But overall, I think this team is amazing, and I can, like I mentioned before, I can definitely see why, or I can definitely see the fact that you did not get sniped, because that must have really helped. But Brandon, you want to go?
Yes, it did.
I also think this is a pretty awesome team, a pretty great team. But like you said, and I also agree that on a lot of the sets, it is kind of predictable. It's because like now, yeah, it's just predictable. And the only really thing I don't like, and this is just a nitpick, personal, and it's the only really thing I don't like, is that, like, for example, Scizor, since this is the only real form of, if I'm not mistaken, it's the only thing that can remove hazards on his team, so anytime you see Scizor, you just know, okay, it's going to just defog and probably have U-turn, bullet punch, and something else. And his team, from what I see, he has a few Mons that don't really want to switch into rocks, and personally, I think the team doesn't really. I feel like Sneasler and Goodra, and even situationally, Scizor can be good offensively, but then the rest of the Mons that I see, I don't really see like the offensive pressure that they can put out. So I feel like some of these Mons could potentially be passive, but at the same time, they can't. The Mons I'm thinking of, he can be creative with them and overcome that. Yeah. But that's just what I really think about the team.
One real quick before we move on to the captain's thoughts. I do think Arcanine definitely is a very big offensive threat. Obviously, Terra Normal Extreme Speed is a thing. And I do think one thing I'd really like to see one week is for him to just go Terra Fire Choice Band. It's just spam Flare Blades against, maybe against Emerald Miner's team, because that thing is weak to fire. But another kind of criticism I have of this team, which I also mentioned with my own, is that he has 2 terrain setters on his team, and default gets rid of the terrain. So if he decides to run a terrain strategy, he has to choose between getting hazards off and also getting rid of his own terrain, or just choosing to accept and deal with the hazards and not defog his own terrain away. So I do think that Scizor, while Scizor is an amazing choice on this team, I think typing-wise it works. It adds amazing priority to this team, but I don't really see it being the best defogger on the team. Like, I still think this team could have used a Rapid Spinner, and because of that, I feel like Scizor, because like the main thing that makes Scizor amazing, obviously, is that Bullet Punch, and with Choice Band and SD sets, that's when Scizor is at its scariest. And I feel like on this team, that scariest Scizor set might not come as often as it should, because of how the burden of hazard removal sitting solely on Scizor. But I'm sure the captain has got even more insight to things, so feel free to share.
All right, so I did share my mostly my full thoughts on this team on my draft analysis. Mm-hmm. I can't disagree with most of the points that you guys have made. I will say one thing that in terms of like the hazard control, because trust me when I say I understand that hazard control was a big problem for me last season, so that's why one of the things I wanted to do on this team was craft the team around that a little. Now, Scizor obviously is a great hazard remover, although it is the only one, technically. But I tried to stack myself with other options like Sneasler, Grounded Poison type, can get rid of Toxic Spikes if it needs to. Stuff like Rotom, stuff like Mesprit have Levitate, so they're not going to get hit by, spikes at all. So I tried to mitigate that a little bit. I idealistically would have maybe had another hazard remover on here, but it just kind of didn't work out that way. But there is always room for tweaks. I like this team a lot. As you mentioned, I didn't get sniped once this whole draft, which I was shocked, to be completely honest with you. But I was really happy about that because I got pretty much everything I wanted. Now, whether I can make the use of it or not is another matter. But the two kind of nits that I have to pick with my own team is number one, and I will tend to agree with you guys, is the predictability argument. So I can see, yeah, well, I have a team full of solid Pokemon. You might know what to expect from those Pokemon on any given week because they all kind of have like a couple of things that they do really well, and you know, maybe so like Ninetales, obviously you'd probably be expecting the Aurora Veil because that's a premier thing it can do. Sneasler, you might expect the Unburdened set because that's a premier thing it can do, you know, so on and so forth. But so yeah, that is a little bit of a negative. The only other little negative I have about my own team is the speed control. So I do have stuff like the Sneasler and the Alola Ninetales that are pretty fast, but other than that, Arcanine's kind of fast. But other than that, it's like there's not amazing speed on this team. So yeah, those are the two things that I would pick. But overall, I'm very happy with this team. I'm very happy with the type balance on this team and the fact that any Pokemon, again, to kind of feed back to an extension of what I wanted to do last season, is to make a team that any Pokemon, pretty much any Pokemon, could come on any given week, but try to add some more versatility to what they can do. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. I'm hoping well.
I'm sure you do well with it. I have absolutely zero doubts about your creativity as a player. So I really hope you do well with this season, with this team. I think the only real criticism I have, not at your team or at you as a player, but as Sneasler in particular, is I do heavily recommend that you switch up the main stab option that you choose, because one mistake that I often see people do with Sneasler is they rely too much on Dire Claw, which if on a Pokemon that is holding a Covert Cloak is just a mediocre poison type move with 80 base power, or even 70 I think it is. Whereas if you use something like Gunk Shot or Poison Jab, you can do a lot more damage. But that's not a critique at you, that's just a critique I have at Sneasler. And I hope that you kind of make that calculated decision between, like, for example, Gunk Shot and Dire Claw, because Covert Cloak is a very common counterplay to Sneasler. But anyway, we're going to go and have a look at the ranking of this team. I'm personally torn between S and A. We did have fair criticism at the team, so I think you guys might also be leaning more towards A, but I'm interested to see what your thoughts are.
I personally have this as an upper A tier team. The only thing that's keeping me personally from putting it in the S tier is just like you. I don't doubt Cap's creativity, but because some of these mons, at least to me, seem limited on what they can do, that's the only thing that's keeping me from putting it in the S.
Very fair.
Yeah, I mean, I lean toward A myself, just because I said the two main two criticisms I have of my own team are the speed control and the predictability arguments. So I see both of those arguments, I acknowledge them, and yeah, I would vote for A as well. All
right, so the captain himself is also, as we say, a big threat. Gotta love it.
I wouldn't have it any other way.
Gotta love it. Gotta love it.
We love it.
We are going to look now at, we're going to move back to the Netherlands, and we're going to have a look at my good friend Stefan's team, coach of the Grand Lake Garchomps. Brandon, you want to start off with this one?
I gotcha. So, first of all, I remember when I first looked at his team, I remember just thinking how I liked the speed tiers he has here. With Meow, he can just be, booster energy or scarfed on either Enamorous or Sandy Shocks, and I'm pretty sure we all remember the things Sandy Shocks did in Season 1. Even though it can't tear anymore, it still has that offensive pressure to it. Mm-hmm. Same with Enamorous. And Meow, ever since DLC came out, has just gotten better with his moves. He has my personal favorite unaware mon in the game, and I feel like it's a pretty great Pokemon to have with Skeledirge. And I feel like some people sleep on Dragalge, but I feel like Dragalge's going to be a great Terra captain with him. I don't really know enough about Hitmontop and Berserker to really give my opinions on them, but I feel like his team has a nice balance of offense and defense. I guess my only real and I mean, this is just a personal and it's not just for Stefan's team, but like any team that's in this situation. My only personal nick is that he only has one form of hazard removal, but at the same time, he has enough ways to set hazards, and he has enough Pokemon that can apply offensive pressure alone that I feel like that's kind of like going to be one of the least of his worries anyway. But overall, I think he's a pretty solid team.
Nice.
Yeah, I would jump in on that and say, yeah, I do think this is a solid team through and through. A couple of things that stand out to me here on this roster are, like you said, kind of the balance of offense and defense. So you have stuff like the Meowscarada, the Enamorus that are just like absolute powerhouses on the offensive side, and then you have stuff like the Slowking, the Skeledirge, the Hitmontop, that are just really solid defensive mons, but they can also hit relatively hard as well. Sandy Shocks is kind of another one where it's got some decent bulk, but also really well-rounded stats overall. A couple of criticisms I have. Oh, actually, I do want to mention. I think the Terra Captains are well placed on this team. I think Dragalge and Hitmontop are good choices for Terra Captains. Again, the Berserker is like a whatever. But the Dragalge and Hitmontop are great Terra Captains in my opinion. On the flip side to that, I will say I think this roster is a little bit shallow because stuff like the Berserker, although I will say Berserker is slept on. I've used Berserker a lot myself, and it is actually a pretty solid Pokemon for the point value that it is. It's definitely the best budget steel type you can draft in my opinion. However, it is still kind of limited. Like, it doesn't have the best stats, especially on the special side. Special defense is pretty abysmal, so like Berserker is kind of limited as to what it can do. I feel kind of the same way about Zangoose. I think that's a bit limited as to what it can do. I mean, it does have, you know, obviously the Toxic Orb set and all that kind of stuff, but I feel like it's kind of limited as to what it can do. To an extent, I would also say Dragalge is limited, although obviously with it being a Terra Captain, that's really going to help it out. So the other thing I would say about this team is that I do think it has a pretty obvious unchecked ice weakness. I do think there's one too many Pokemon that are weak to ice here. But other than that, I think it's a really solid team through and through.
I definitely agree. I definitely, when you guys were talking about the type chart, I'm surprised you didn't mention ground, because look at his first two mons are resistant to ground, being Meowscarada and obviously Enamorus. But we have Skeledirge, Dragalge, Sandy Shocks, Regirock, and Berserker, who are all weak to ground. He's got a massively unchecked ground weakness, and that is going to be a big deal, especially because Meowscarada is not exactly a bulky Pokemon, and relying on that thing to take your ground type attacks could definitely hurt. So definitely, I think that's not a big thing I like about this team. Another big issue is I definitely do heavily agree with Cap. I think Berserker is a great steel type as a budget pick, but that's the thing. Berserker is his only steel type. Something that we've seen, especially in the higher ranked teams, is that they all have very useful steel types, and if you rely on Berserker specifically for like walling the majority of types, that is not going to be ideal. Now, I do think that because of the fact that the Terra Captains are so well placed, which is another big plus I heavily agree on, I do think Dragalge and Hitmontop are definitely going to help with that, especially because of the fact that Hitmontop gets Intimidate and also being able to change its fighting typing, it can definitely be a better ball than some people might give it credit for. However, as awesome as I think the Terra Captains are, I actually kind of wish that Stefan made Regirock a Terra Captain, because I don't think very highly of that mon when it can't Terra. Pure Rock is an awful typing, and the only reason why Garganacl uses it well is because it has a billion other things that it has going for it. So I do kind of wish that Regirock was a Terra Captain on this team, maybe over Hitmontop. But I do think, I don't think Dragalge and Hitmontop are bad Terra Captains at all, and if he feels the need to change it throughout the season, he definitely can. And another kind of problem I have with this team is that Meowscarada is also the only Pokemon with a speed tier above 110. Now, Stefan does compensate with that very well by having a lot of bulk on his team. The Dragalge, I think, is an excellent defensive Pokemon in my opinion, especially because it gets Flip Turn, and also because it can Terra once again. The Slacking, the Skeledirge, sorry, not Slacking, sorry, Slowking and Skeledirge, as well as Regirock on the physical side, all have good bulk and also longevity behind them. Most of them get recovery moves. But I definitely do think that this team is, thanks to having no real like fast mon, apart from Meowscarada, this team can be vulnerable to getting swept. And having a defensive structure is nice, but again, if you look at all of Stefan's bulky structure, like having a team with a lot of longevity and bulk is nice, but if there's one type that you're super weak to, in this case ground, it's definitely exploitable still, and it could fall apart. So that's definitely one big criticism I have of this team, and for that reason I actually don't think too highly of this team. Let's get into ranking it. Me personally, I'm leaning towards either B mostly, or even a C.
Maybe yeah, I would agree with B. I would agree with B. I think B would be fair. And again, I think you're absolutely right with this being more of a defensive team than it is an offensive team. Although he has, some, fast mons, but the speed control is just not there as well. So that's a good point. And the ground weakness, I don't know how I missed that one, but the glaring ground weakness. So yeah, I think B is fair.
Brandon?
And I also agree with B because I also overlooked the ground weakness until you said something about it.
Yeah.
But I believe B is fair.
I do agree. I feel like the team is definitely not without its strengths, and I think maybe C is a bit harsh because it does... I did mention how it's prone or vulnerable to getting swept, but it does have these Skeledirge with that unaware, so that definitely does help it a bit. And I think that also helps me put it onto B tier, so I think that's very fair. This is a very long video. But we're heading towards the end now. We're going to take a look at my week 1 opponent, which is Lazy Boy, yes, coach of the sleepy Laxingtons. Tyler also knows Lazy Boy from the Discord server. I guess I'll take the lead on this one because this is my week 1 opponent. First of all, he has the Great Tusk. Respect the hell out of that. Obviously, that was the first Pokemon that I ever drafted as well, so I can see he kind of takes a similar approach to me. He looked at the OU usage set and he thought, yes, good pick. I do really like Lazy Boy's Terra Captains as well. The Galarian Articuno is a Pokemon that I've had my eyes on for Season 2 and 3 as well, but just wasn't really able to fit it on my team. It was potentially a replacement pick after after Kilowattrel got sniped off me, but then this Mon went as well. I was able to fix it pretty well, but I do really think Galarian Articuno is a cool Mon, just because of its high special attack and also access to the move Stored Power, which can be very threatening. I also really like Lapras as a Terra Captain, and the reason why I actually quite like Lapras as a Terra Captain is because of its ability Water Absorb. And for example, one thing I've seen happen in a league once is someone using a Terra Ghost Lapras to completely wall or Shifu Rapid Strike, because you can basically use your you can use your Water Absorb to wall one type, and then you can use your Terra type to wall the other. So for example, you can just wall Pokemon that rely heavily on water type moves. Like for example with Walking Wake, you could do the same thing by going Terra Steel, and then you completely wall Walking Wake stabs. I'm just naming something. So yeah, and that's not even his only water, bulky water. Obviously he's got the Primarina as well. I do really think that I do think very highly of Ogerpon Cornerstone in draft personally, because of the fact that it also has Sturdy. It does hurt the fact that it's locked into the Cornerstone mask, so it can't hold a Focus Sash, which might hurt a bit. But I do think that Ogerpon Cornerstone obviously also is a very big threat offensively, and it has that 100% accurate Ivy Cudgel. He definitely does have good walls as well. Obviously, great Tusk, great physical wall. Isui and Gudra, great special wall. And he definitely has wall breakers too, with again that Ogerpon, the Articuno, the Chandelure, and the Raikou. Now, despite being, I think, might be the only coach or one of the only coaches to have 12 Pokemon, I do think the roster is a little bit shallow, and because of that, like for example, I'm pretty sure he's even planning, because he asked me today about transactions, I'm pretty sure he's planning on trading all 3 of his latest Pokemon in Illumise, Komala, and Gabite away, and I definitely agree with that choice if he's planning on doing that, because I don't really see any value of these Pokemon on his team ever. If I look at this team, I'm just going to prep for the first 9 team, but it's definitely not without its flaws. But yeah, I think the Great Tusk is excellent hazard removal. The speed tiers are there, and they're also not too exploitable. So again, for a first-time coach, I think he did it pretty well.
Yeah, so I gotta be honest with you guys, I don't have a lot of thoughts about this team. This was the one team out of the entirety of the 16 that I was kind of struggling with formulating my opinion on, and here's why. So he's got the 12 Pokemon, obviously. He's the only coach that drafted 12 Pokemon this season. It is a deep roster, but it is also an underwhelming roster. roster, in my opinion. So you do have stuff like the Great Tusk, obviously massive powerhouse, best spinner in the game, no questions there, hits like a truck, tank as well. You have something like the Raikou, obviously very fast, hits very hard on the special side. But then you have like all these other Pokemon, like you mentioned, like you got the Gabite, the Mala, the Illuminous. Although Illuminous in its own right is a decent prankster user, I believe. But you even have something like the Lapras, which to me doesn't really have a place on this theme thanks to the Primarina. So it's like when I look at that, I'm thinking, are you really gonna bring Lapras over Primarina? You know, like
that's
Primarina
fair,
is
actually,
obviously
yeah.
a much better Pokemon than Lapras is. So and then to boot, you're using your Terra Captain status on the Lapras as well. So while he does have, you know, he has stuff like the Chandelure, which is a big powerhouse. The Galarian Articuno is as well. Hisuian Goodra, you can't count that one out either.
I love Hisuian Goodra.
But I don't know. Yeah, so I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of Pokemon on this team that don't need to be here. That's kind of my biggest thought about this team. And overall, it just feels kind of underwhelming. Like if you could, again, like the Skunk Tank, like not a terrible Pokemon, but like what's it gonna do for the team? You know what I mean?
That one is also in PU for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. So the more I think about this team and the more I look about this team, I just, again, you know, to use a word that I had said before about another team, I just think this team is kind of underwhelming. Like, it's not without its powerhouses. Again, like, obviously, any team that has a Great Tusk on it is always going to be a problem. But at the same time, I just think, like I said, this team just seems kind of underwhelming. But, Brandon, your thoughts?
When I look at this team, I also see some Pokemon that just make me I can't really see how they fit.
Question everything.
Yeah.
That sounds kind of harsh.
Yeah.
He turns into that meme where he's just like looking into the distance and the wind with the wind blowing and stuff.
Yep.
Well, can't say those are the words I was going to use, but I think that more or less describes it. Because, like, for example, Gabite, for example, if you have Great Tusk, I don't see Gabite ever coming to a game. And then also, I don't really, outside of Articuno, I don't really see much of a check to like a ground weakness outside of the sturdy on what's that thing called, Ogerpon, but at the same time I know you don't want to sacrifice sturdy for no reason, you know, with Raikou, Skunk Tank, Ogerpon, Goodra, and Chandelure, and then none of them can Terra, so they're all just sitting ducks if you bring a strong enough ground type. And even though Great Tusk is bulky, he also you don't want him to get chipped because Great Tusk has no way to, you know, recover outside of like if you're holding like a berry or something. And that's another thing. Most of his bulkier mons, they're bulky, but they lack a way to really get their HP back outside of like Primarina with Aquamarine. But I mean, that's so specific.
I think you're forgetting about Draining Kiss. Does it get Draining Kiss? I don't even know.
It does, but let's not forget Draining Kiss is also 50 base power.
Yeah. So I see this team, to me personally, defensively, I see how it can work, but I can also feel like it's kind of underwhelming.
Yeah.
But at the same time, for this to be his first draft, if I'm not mistaken, I feel like he did good for his first time.
Yeah.
But I still have my critiques about the team overall, and I feel like there are certain things he could do.
I personally have great faith in the fact that Lazy Boy is planning some pretty fire transactions that he's planning on making the team better. Because like you mentioned before, the Lapras, how many times are you going to bring that over? Like, because honestly, like, I looked at this team for my week 1 prep, and I was thinking, you know what, Lapras is not a bad Pokemon at all, and the fact that it's a Terra Captain helps. But you are very right in saying that it shouldn't really show up if Primarina is showing up, and Primarina is objectively the better Pokemon. So, like, how often is it realistically going to come? And I do remember correctly that I think he got sniped off of Overquill, I believe it was. So he got another Dark Poison type. But I mean, Skuntank, I don't think very highly of it. It's like the way I look at Skuntank personally is is I look at its stats and it's just not good enough in literally every department. Its attack stat is not high enough, its special attack is not high enough, and its bulk is not high enough to counter a lot of top tier threats either. So Skuntank just falls short for me in too many different ways.
Yep.
So,
let me just tell you, Skuntank is a Pokemon I've looked at ever since it came out in Generation 4, and I've never once used it on any team in anything ever, because I'm just looking at it and I'm like, why can't you just have like 10 more stat points here, 10 more stat, but like you said, everything is just like right under the line with it, where it's just not. I think this is my unsolicited advice, and again, I should really stop giving advice to people I'm going to play later in the season.
Yeah, you're week 2. You're week 2 opponent, my friend.
Yeah, whatever. I've shot myself in the foot enough times to the point it doesn't matter anymore. So, here's honestly, I would transact the Gabite, the Kamala, the Lapras, maybe the Skuntank, maybe the Luminous too. Like, I'd probably erase all of that stuff, just about all that stuff at the bottom of the draft, and just pick up like 1 or 2 like really solid, like 7, 8, 9, and even higher, point tier Pokemon, and just go from. But I know we're probably about time to rank this thing. I'm just going to throw my opinion out there. I think this is probably a C rank team. It's not without its merits, but at the same time, I just don't see it being that high.
Heavily agree. I'm just going to keep it short and sweet. I don't think this team deserves to be in D tier just because of how it has great tasks. Let's just keep it at that. But I don't think it deserves to be in D tier, but it's right up there in C as well, in my opinion.
And I also believe that this is a C tier team.
All right, that is it, and we're gonna move on to the last 3 coaches. The next up is another very good friend of mine.
There, people.
We're almost there. This is a very long video, but I hope everyone enjoyed it. I hope you're not out of popcorn yet either. We're gonna move on to.
Hope you guys enjoy it more than we do.
Yeah, because we're getting tired, but we're getting through it for your entertainment. Don't worry, we're gonna keep going.
We're toughing it out for you guys. We're doing like a 3-hour long video for your entertainment. So I hope you all enjoy it.
Exactly, but I knew that you guys would be great commissioners to do this with me. Anyway. We're going to move on to Sneezy Wims, coach of the Whimsical Whimsicotts, and I basically can take half the credit for this team because I did a lot of helping with helping Sneezy put his team together. So because it's like almost my team, half of it is almost my team. I'll let you guys go at it first because I obviously was there when he drafted it and when we put the draft plan together. But before we do that, I would also like to mention that just like B-Nard, Sneezy did get sniped a few times, especially off of his favorite Pokemon Whimsicott, but not too often. So he definitely got a lot of ones that he wanted. But anyway, go ahead.
Go ahead, Brandon.
I want to start off by saying I feel like Whimsy has a pretty from a defensive standpoint, I feel like he has a pretty balanced team. Because you have things like, I feel like he has a nice water fire grass core with Tentacruel, Rotom, and Shaman, and even the Palafin, which always is going to just be a threat. Only thing I don't like about Palafin, and it's just a personal thing, it's just the fact he has to send him in, then send him out, so that just leaves like a free turn. Yeah. Yeah. Let me not bring that up. But I do like, this team. While it can be defensive, it can also be offensive because Palafin's always, going to be a thing. What's this thing called? Ambipom with Fake Out, and then all his other moves. He can, he's really strong offensively, I feel like. And then, great got it messed up. Iron Treads, he can, come in, take hits, and then dish hits out. And if I'm not and then he has Espeon and Flygon, who I think are pretty great Terra captains. The only thing I don't personally like about Flygon, and this is just another personal thing, is just the fact that he kind of has to set up. So once again, it's just a free turn, but at the same time with the right Terra, that can, he can circumvent that. But I feel like for this to be like his first draft, if I'm not mistaken, it's a pretty good team. The only other thing I really don't like is the speed tiers. Like, he has a lot of base 100s, which, as we know nowadays, is kind of not really the thing anymore. But granted, once again, he can make up with it with Ambipom's priority, and I want to say that Iron Treads gets Ice Shard, and then Palafin has Jet Punch, so he does have priority to make up for it. But that's what I personally thought about the team when I first looked at it.
Iron Treads does not get Ice Shard, that is regular Donphan, but the Paradox Force
I was just about to say that.
I can be wrong.
About to say that.
No worries.
No, it's all good. It's all good. So, but yeah, so I would say about this team, I do like the type balance on this team. That's one of the big things that stood out to me is the fact that there are no really glaring weaknesses on this team that I could see. I think he did a nice job of type balancing. I do also think that he did a nice job of placing Terra Captains, so I think Flygon and Espeon are incredible Terra Captain choices on this team. I like the utility on the team. He's got ways to set hazards, he's got ways to remove hazards, he's got good amount of priority. I'll talk a little bit about the Palafin. Obviously, as you guys know, Palafin was my round 1 draft pick last season. I found Palafin to be a little disappointing, not gonna lie to you guys. The fact that you have to switch it in and out to get it in hero form is, I'm sorry to say, Sneezy, it's gonna be a lot more detrimental for you think. I'm just gonna throw that out there now. It's gonna hurt you more than you think it is. I hope you can make better use of it than I did, because obviously I did not do very well with it last season. But Palafin is a great Pokemon, except for that. Like the inconvenience of having to get Palafin in hero form is something that I think you just have to use Palafin to realize. So I wish him the best with it, and I hope that he proves me wrong. But at the same time, I don't know. Yeah. But I look at the rest of the team, and I think really the only big negative I have about this team is something that I've said about a couple other teams, and that's that I think, while I do think that this team has good offensive and defensive options, definitely I think more defensive options, but it's not without the offensive powerhouses too. One word to this team to me is just like, it does feel a little underwhelming, because like, Palafin, obviously, there's a big caveat to that, being able to perform at its top potential, but you have a lot of Pokemon that don't have, like, when I look at this team, I don't see, like, anything that's, like, massively high stat here or massively high stat there. It just seems like a very, very medium team all around to me. So, and I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but I don't see, like, the heavy hitter that's gonna, like, hit you the home run and win you the game, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so that's kind of my my one negative of it.
That is very fair. Sneezy and I definitely, obviously I helped him put the team together. I basically, what we did is I basically just gave him a checklist of what I think is a good draft team, and I just said, just here you go, here's your point budget, go draft some mons. Palafin is one of his all-time favorite Pokemon from Generation 9, so I'm very glad he was able to pick it up. He's definitely got some like emotional attachment to Palafin, which I think is really cute, just like with me and Torterra. He did have a couple of snipes. Mainly he wanted Excadrill, but obviously that was gone straight away, so he got the next best thing, which is Iron Treads. And then I think obviously he also wanted Whimsicott, which is his favorite Pokemon of all time, which Raymond stole off him, but he got Shaman in return, and also Darkspun, so he kind of like split up. Instead of a grass fairy type, he got a grass type and a fairy type. But yeah, I definitely
on the Darkspun.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. I had Darkspun in Season 1, and I definitely think I didn't make very good use of it. I did make good use of it, but I really feel like, especially in the semi-finals, which is the game where I got eliminated from the season, I really feel like it should have been on the team. I do think, considering the fact that Darkspun is the lowest value opponent of this team, I do think the roster overall consists of solid mons, simple as that. If Brandon is the #1 team when it comes to saying no to hazards, this team is a very close second with the Magic Bounce on Espeon, Rapid Spin on Tentacruel, and the Rapid Spin on the Iron Treads. So he's not really going to be worried about that too much. And like you mentioned, he also has a very, very versatile type roster. Like, there's not a single type that he's weak to, because the only type that he's kind of weak to is Ground. But then he also has Shaman, which is resistant to it, and 2 Levitators, which is a very, very big deal. Obviously, the speed tiers being cramped together is not ideal, so bulky teams can definitely take advantage of that again. But that does definitely mean that it is hard for the faster threats to speed keep his team as well. And the fact that even his walls are fast mons, like we all know the power of moving first, right? Like that's never ever a bad thing. And to round it off, he also has a couple of really strong priority options, mainly the Fake Out on Ambipom, which again, I normally don't really mention Fake Out, but the reason I mention here is because of Stab, Normal, and Technician. And he also obviously has the first impression of the Flygon, which people cannot forget it does. It does actually get that. And because it's a Terra Captain, it can even go Terra Bug with that if it wants to. And obviously, we all know Big Bad Palafin's Jet Punch is never something you can count out. That's genuinely a win condition by itself. But yeah, I think Sneezy, again, I did help him with his team, but considering he is a first-time coach, I think he did a fantastic job with his team. I actually think I like his team the most out of all the new coaches. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Let's get into the ranking.
Yeah, I mean, I can see this. I like this team, although I don't know that I like it as much as you like it. Also, I think you're forgetting Anastasia.
Yeah, I genuinely like this team more than Anastasia, I'm gonna be honest. It's only by a small bit, but
All
I think it's the best one out of all the new ones.
Well, that makes one of us. So I'm gonna say this probably deserves to be an A-ranked team. Like, I do like this team a lot. The one thing that kind of holds this team back from being S for me is, like I said, I just don't see, like, it's very solid through and through, but like I just don't see the like big win con, you know what I mean? I don't see the big heavy hitting, like this is what you're gonna, and if it's Palafin, then I don't know that that's gonna work. I hate to sound pessimistic or skeptical, but having used Palafin all season last season, I don't think Palafin is gonna fill that void. Let me just say it that way. And if it does, it's gonna be at a high cost. So I would say it's still a really solid team all around. I'd say A.
Okay, Brandon's the tiebreaker then. Although I could definitely say A as well, I'm gonna be honest.
As for me, I'm gonna have to agree with Captain B-Nard for the same reasons. I don't really see like the like I see the things that can win the game, but to me they all come at a price. Palafin has to switch in and come out. Flygon in most situations probably has to Dragon Dance at least once to be a sweeper. Espeon, yeah. Espeon can sweep with Calm Mind, but once again, it's speed tier. Like, if you have a bunch of Pokemon that are faster than it, then unless you just so happen to get the perfect Terra, it's not really reliable. And Ambipom, I mean, you're gonna rely on fake out so much, and most people are gonna try to have a Ghost type or a Steel type, so it's only but so reliable. Even though I do acknowledge that thing on Ambipom fake out, it's a very powerful move for him. But yeah, A tier.
That's very fair. I also like realizing it now. Obviously, I'd helped him put his team together, so I might be a little bit biased with it. But the reason why I think you guys make a very fair point is because if you look at the special attack on that team, it's not very high. Like there's definitely no like Thunderous Therian on that team with a base 145 special attack. You know what I mean? So I think A is very fair. I'm gonna put it in A next to the rest of the coaches there. And we are into the top two now, and kind of ironic because we're leaving the Pokemon Scholar and Viola till last.
Just I noticed that.
It wasn't even intentional, but just like the draft reveal. All right,
I love it.
Gotta love it indeed. Yeah, you go ahead, Brandon. We're gonna be taking a look at Lionel, coach of the Brawling Conkeldurrs.
Okay, so you gotta save Ray for me to go first. So.
Oh yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead.
You know you will. But when I look at Lionel's team, I like the speed tiers like he has with Greninja and Kilowattrel. Even the 102 on Garchomp isn't that bad, and all three of them, they can just like you can't really just run. You can't just stay in front of them. They can just hit you, so they do force, switch outs and stuff like that. What else was it about his team that I was looking at? I feel like he has a really good Terra Captain in Kilowattrel and in my opinion, a good Terra Captain in Faragariff. Yeah, Faragariff, that's her name. Meganium, I don't really know a lot about Meganium, so I'm not really sure. And I feel like he has some nice bulk with Annihilate, Fortress. I don't know the most about Deoxys defense, but since it's Deoxys defense, I'm going to assume it has, good defenses as per its name.
Yep. Very fair.
And then Garchomp, it can be bulky too. So, if you have a team with a lot of physical mons, that's not really a Pokemon you can really, come reliably stay in on. Not really sure about Rampardos from a draft perspective, but I think kind of highly of Rampardos, especially if you can find a way to get it in a position where it's faster than stuff, which is the challenge in itself. And then I think very highly of Muck and then Greninja in general, but I think he has a good team. Not sure if I would call it not sure personally if I would call it great, but I do definitely think it's a good team.
Yeah, I would agree with you. So this is another team that definitely is more defensive than offensive, in my opinion. So you've got a lot of pretty solid defensive threats on this team. Like, obviously, Annihilape can be pretty defensive, as we know from seasons past. Garchomp can be kind of both. Fortress defensive. Muck is a little bit of both. Obviously, Deoxys defense, Meganium are pretty defensive as well. But he also has the Greninja, obviously, very fast and hits very hard on the special side. I do think the Terra Captains are extremely well placed on this team. As someone who, harkening back to my last season once again, Kilowattrel was... Yep, that was pretty much my chief Terra Captain last season, was Kilowattrel, and it definitely didn't disappoint. I will say I thought I could have played it better in retrospect, but I definitely was not disappointed in having Kilowattrel as a Terra Captain. I think that's a great choice. Farigiraf is actually another Pokemon I had on the team last season too, although I didn't end up using it. It's a great choice for a Terra Captain. I think people sleep on Farigiraf, but I think it's a lot better than people give it credit for. Meganium as well, I think that's actually a really good choice for a Terra Captain too, just because of the fact that Meganium is not the most impressive Pokemon, but if it gets a chance to set up, and we all know, if you can Terra at the right moment into the right type to get like a turn or two of free setups, I think Meganium could really make use of that Terra. So I do like this team a lot. I like the bulk on the team, and I like the power on the team. The only real criticism that I have of this team is I think the potential for passivity on this team is a little high. So, like, obviously, Forretress is pretty passive. Deoxys defense is pretty passive. Meganium can be pretty passive. So there's a danger that you can leave yourself open to be set up on in that situation. Even Rampardos, though, I have to say, like, this roster, even though it's 10 Pokemon, which most of them are, they all seem pretty viable. So I can't knock them for that. But overall, I think this is a really solid team.
Yep, I agree with most of the things you guys said. I'm going to personally disagree with something, though, that I think that Rampardos is a terrible Pokemon. I think this team is very well put together, and the first 9 I can realistically see coming to every single game. But I think if you were going to draft Rampardos, and I do remember that Leo picked this up as a replacement because he wanted Darkspun, which he got sniped off of, and I can definitely see why. But I do think that unless you put it with either Tailwind or especially Sticky Web support, I don't think very highly of Rampardos. Every single one of its stats, except for its attack, is terrible. It doesn't take any hits. It doesn't outspeed anything, even with a Choice Scarf, because of that terrible base 56 speed. And its speed isn't even slow enough to the point where it can abuse Trick Room. So even if you wanted to go with a Trick Rooms team with Farigiraf, even that Rampardos isn't even good at. And it's also vulnerable to every form of priority, like Vacuum Wave, Mach Punch, Aqua Jet, the list goes on. However, I don't mean to just make this entirely about shitting on Rampardos, because I do think the rest of the team is very good. I do think, unlike a lot of other bulky teams we've seen, Leo's team is very fast. He's got 2 very high speed tiers with Kilowattrel's base 125 and Greninja's base 122. I do think, especially now that Greninja has Sludge Wave, it's a very solid round 1 pick. I already really enjoyed having Greninja in Season 1, or Season 2, sorry. It was a Leaf agent back then, and if I had Sludge Wave back then, I would have used it even more than I had. So Greninja is a very big threat. I also really like the fact, Annihilape's role in this team, because not only is it an amazing spin blocker for the many hazard options he has, but this is actually a team that is a little bit weak to Bug, ironically enough, and that's not the biggest deal in the world, but it does also mean you can U-turn on this team quite freely. However, Annihilape is a Pokemon that is 4 times resistant to U-turn, and every single time you hit this Pokemon, its Rage Fist grows in power. And so I think even despite the fact that it was a round 3 pick, I think Annihilape is going to... I can see Annihilape being the star of this team, honestly. I think it fits incredibly well. Thank you, Leo, for honoring Icy Dude, who is not with us here this league. And I think Annihilape is very solid. And another thing I like about Leo's team is that this also ties up with the L.E.A.F thing. He's got a competitive user and a defiant user. And the reason why I wanted Kilowattrel for this season was to punish defog attempts from people trying to defog away Samurott spikes. And that's exactly what he goes for. If you attempt to defog on Leo, then he can either send out the defiant Annihilate or the competitive Kilowattrel, and you could be in big trouble. So I think like any form of hazard removal that is not rapid spin or defog, which is the most reliable way, is going to be your only like consistent way of removing hazards from Leo or against Leo without getting punished. So I think those are amazing, all amazing traits. And yeah, again, the real thing, there's also a bit of an unchecked fairy weakness on this team, because Foresters is the only Pokemon that resists fairy on this team, because Alolan Muck obviously is a poison type not resistant to fairy because of its part dark typing, so we can't forget to mention that. So it's a little bit weak to bug, a little bit weak to fairy, although again, you can abuse that user with Annihilate. And I just don't think Rampardos is a very good Pokemon at all. If you put it with a Sticky Web user, it honestly can be a lot better. But I do think this roster can be a little bit shallow because Rampardos is realistically never going to come to a single game. But maybe he proves me wrong, and if he does, I respect the hell out of it, because I do, despite me talking it down so much, I do really love Rampardos as a Pokemon. I genuinely do. So,
fair enough. Let's
go ahead and ranking this team. Honestly, I'm not sure. I'll let you guys decide first, because I'm not really sure where I place it.
Personally, I would place. I'm kind of stuck too, because I'm hovering between like a lower big threat or just being a really solid team.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm leaning on A, to be honest with you guys, because I think that there are a lot of pros to this team. There's certainly a lot more pros than cons to this team. It's kind of weird because, like, I think we always have a little bit of a hard time ranking the more defensive teams, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like you don't win a game with defense typically, especially, you know, in this day and age in Pokemon. But, you know, I think as far as a team that's more defensive is concerned, I think this is probably about as good as it gets.
Yeah, heavily agree.
I think I'm leaning A.
I heavily agree. I think if you're going to make a defensive team, I think this is the way to do it, because like I mentioned before, the thing I really like about Leo's team is just the raw synergy. He's got the Defiant, the Competitive, the Hazards, amazing Spin Blocker, he's got the 2-speed here sorted out. It's honestly a really, like, this not only is the team like filled with individually good Pokemon, but they also work really well together. And for that reason, I think I definitely put it in A as well. And obviously any team that Raymond puts together is S, so we're going to put Raymond in S tier and we're going to end the video there. No, I'm joking.
You took the joke right out of my mouth again. I was going to be like, so I'll kick this one off. There's no debate needed. Raymond won the first 2 seasons, so we're not even going to talk about his team. S tier. Have a good night, everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I do think, I don't want to do too much, because first of all, I do know that Raymond put a lot of thought behind his team once again. And second of all, he has the Luminion, which is one of the most base choices ever. I freaking love it. I have a very big soft spot for Luminion. But anyway, Captain, go ahead. Yeah. Start us off with the last team.
Yes. So when it comes to Raymond, I guess I'm always the one leading the charge. So I will say that the biggest thing, so when I look at this team, the biggest thing that jumps out to me about it is balance. Once again, balance. So this team is very type balanced. I don't really see any glaring weaknesses on this team. Maybe I'm missing one, but I didn't really see any glaring weaknesses on this team when I took a look at it. Also, I think he obviously has an insane speed tier by virtue of the fact that he has, 3 Prankster users on this team.
Yep.
So that's obviously going to be a big threat, I think. Obviously, he has the Baxcalibur, the big heavy hitter from last season that took him to the Pokemon Viola. So you can never count Bax out. It is a very, I think, underrated Pokemon. Even without Terra, it's a real powerhouse.
For sure.
Then we got the Ogerpon Wellspring, which is another powerhouse. Obviously, the SD Trailblaze, the water grass typing is incredible. You've got the Glamora, which again, not to go back to the Season 2 Pidgeys.
Oh,
but,
here we go.
Another big player on the Season 2 Philadelphia Pidgeys. Hopefully he can make better use of it than me. I feel like I'm saying that about all the Season 2 Philadelphia Pidgeys. You know, it is what it is.
You'll do better this season, I'm sure.
Yes, well, you never know, but I'm hoping. But this isn't about me. This is about Scholar and Violet Raymond. Mm-hmm. So, I do like this team. I think the one of the criticisms I have of this team is it definitely does feel like a shallow roster to me. So, you know, I know I'm gonna catch a whole bunch of crap for this, but let's be realistic here. When is Luminion gonna come to a game?
Every game, bro. Luminion's amazing.
Oh, for God's sake! Especially over like Swampert, for example, like another bulky water type. Like when's, you know what I mean? So it's not gonna happen, I don't think. I mean, knowing Ray, he probably will bring it at least once, but in the interest of what's actually more tactically advantageous, I don't see it. Even stuff like Meowstic and Whimsicott seem to kind of feel like the same on the team, so I can't see him bringing both of those in a game. And so yeah, this roster feels kind of limited to me. Archaludon is an absolute powerhouse, no question. Although you know, perhaps he will try to set the rein with one of his prankster Pokemon and then make use of the Electro Shot, which is just an absolutely broken move in every sense of the word.
Yep.
Especially in the rain, obviously. Emboar, we can't count that thing out as well. I think Emboar as a Terra Captain is actually very, very, very smart. I think Emboar is a Pokemon that is very borderline in my opinion, but adding the ability to Terra to it will certainly increase its value. But yeah, overall, I think it's a pretty solid team, a pretty balanced team, but I just think, again, my main criticism would be the roster seems kind of shallow.
That's fair. Brandon?
I also think that it's a good and balanced team. When I first looked at it, my only real critique, or I guess personal thing at first about it was that unless I'm wrong, his only real form of hazard removal is Mortal Spin.
Correct.
And he has...
Oh God, he's repeating... Ray, no, you're repeating my mistake from last season. Don't do it. Don't do it. Make the transaction, for God's sake. All right,
and he has 3 Pokemon in Emboar, Baxcalibur, and Thundurus, which hate to come in on, you know, Stealth Rocks are up. Granted, Boots or Terra on Emboar could change that, but, you know, it doesn't change the fact that initially, you know, he does have that slight weakness. But I do feel like this team is a good team. There's one thing I want to point out that I've never seen on a draft team. He has 3 Pokemon that are the exact same type, and arguably none of them are, well, actually 2 of them aren't even, they have their own, you know, they're all their own resistances to, you know, different things. With Ogerpon, Swampert, and Luminion, I do also agree, I don't really see when Luminion comes. I don't even know what Luminion does. But I said the same thing about Probopass last season.
Be a goat. That's what Luminion does.
But I do think he has a balanced team offensively and defensively. And then the team can also be it can keep you thinking, because Emboar can be special or physical. You might expect a Dragon Dance Baxcalibur, and he just decides, you know what, I'm going to bring Bandit or Scarf, you know. Archaludon, like Cap said, is definitely a powerhouse. And I feel like Whimsicott and or pretty good Terra Captains. I don't really know enough about Meowstic to really say anything about Meowstic. But I think he has a pretty nice team.
Meowstic is just as far as as kind of like a prankster you.
Gotcha.
Yep. So I guess I'll end this one off. I think my bias above Luminion aside, I obviously have been closely following Ray's drafting process, and I also kind of know a little bit ins and outs. Obviously, I won't put all of his cards on the table because the season hasn't even started yet, but I kind of do know the thought process behind what he drafted his team for. And the reason why he brought this many prankster users is because he is planning to put some real, like his idea of team basically is he has a bunch of really hard hitters like Emboar, obviously with that Reckless. Swampert has a pretty high attack stat as well that can go on the offensive, but mainly Glamora with that amazing special attack stat, Ogerpon, Wellspring, and Baxcalibur. And the strategy with him is he's planning on using these with Prankster Thunderwave users to cripple the opposing team and let these sweepers or hard wall breakers go to town. And I can definitely see he's done that well. I also think his defensive core is good enough. Obviously, Archaludon is not only very bulky, but it gets even bulkier the more you hit it, thanks to stamina. One of the best abilities in the game, in my opinion. The Whimsicott, honestly, it's not the biggest bulkiest thing in the world, but Grass Fairy is a pretty unique typing with some useful resistances, mainly ground. It's also a grass type not weak to bug, which helps. And obviously Swampert obviously can go amazing defensively if it wants as well. And another thing I really like about Ray's team is the synergy with, this is something I mentioned between Leo's team as well, is that the Glamora obviously is a premier hazard setter, and the Thundurus obviously can have Prankster but can also have Defiant. Let's not forget that unlike Therian form, Thundurus Incarnate gets two great abilities that it can use. So because of me personally, because I kind of know what Raymond's planning, and because I've seen him already built for week 1, like Brandon, spoiler alert, I already know, I'm not going to tell you obviously, but I know exactly what Ray is bringing, and he's cooking.
Yeah, this seems like a real coup against Ray right here, I gotta say.
Yeah, no, it's
like I'm not going to put all his cards on the table, proceeds to put his cards on the table.
Yeah, no, I mean, trust me, he's planning way more than this. He's planning way more than this. I'm just telling you, like, the main idea behind this team, because the last thing I want is that we rank his team lower than it deserves to be, when there was definitely a good plan behind it. So let's get into ranking the final team. We joked about it, but I genuinely do believe Raymond deserves an S tier. Honestly, I think I really like it.
So I actually, the one, as I'm looking at this and as we were talking, I have to add, which is going to factor into my decision. He actually does kind of have a bit of an unchecked rock weakness on this team, which is something I hadn't initially noticed, but after what Brandon said, it kind of, made me realize that. I don't know. I don't think that this is an S team. I think that this, I'm kind of torn between A and B with this team, to be honest with you, because I could see it being an A tier team, but I could also see it be a B tier team, just because, and I'm trying to take all Raymond's skill out of the equation here, which is hard to do because obviously the guy won both of our other 2 seasons, so that's hard. However, if we're ranking these teams strictly based on how they look on paper, I'm kind of torn between B and an A. I could see either one.
That's fair. Maybe I'm a little bit biased because I know Raymond's drafting process and I know what he's cooking with it. Yeah, probably. That's very much a possibility. But I'm going to stand my ground. I'm going to say S tier, and I'm curious to see what Brandon thinks.
This is how, and I'm going to put it just like this, because Captain B-Nard did bring up a good point. If I take player skill out of the equation and I'm just looking at the team on paper, I would say this is an A tier team. But at the same time, if I did factor in skill, I would say it's an S tier team.
So what's your final verdict?
I'm gonna say A.
All right. In that case, we're taking the middle ground and we're going to say A tier. But if Raymond wins this season again, that is not, I'm just going to let you know right now, that is not on me. So here we have our final ranking. We have been on an absolute marathon, so we're not even going to bother putting them in the right order. But this, ladies and gentlemen, is your BHDL Season 3 Power Rankings. If you did enjoy this video, please leave a like and subscribe if you did enjoy, because we've been sitting here for ages. This is a marathon session and a half, so I really do think it deserves a like, and obviously subscribe if you did enjoy. That is our verdict.
Yeah,
for
we suffered for your entertainment, people.
Yeah, exactly.
We suffered for your entertainment, people.
Hopefully it was worth it.
Prep or something,
But with that, I do want to thank Brandon and the captain for joining me in these power rankings. I do think it turned out great. I think we had a very powerful insights on every single team. And with that, we wish all of the coaches a very good season. We're going to sign off because we're all tired. Again, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time. Peace.
Peace.